मानुषी संवाद में आप सबका स्वागत है. Welcome to the 6th January 2022 edition of Manushi Samvad. Well, friends, you are well aware that we are carrying out this series. We are continuing with this series on Jati and Varna versus Caste. आपको याद होगा कि 20 दिसंबर को एक हमारा प्रोग्राम हुआ था मैत्री गोस्वामी जी के साथ, और उस पर बहुत से सवाल दोनों तरफ से उठाए गए थे. बेसिकली ये एक डिबेट बन गई थी, ट्रेडिशनलिस्ट वर्सेस मॉडर्निस्ट. जो पूरी तरह ट्रेडिशन से बंधे रहना चाहते हैं वो सोचते हैं कि उनके पास शास्त्रिक अथॉरिटी है उस ट्रेडिशन को अपहोल्ड करने की, और बहुत से ऐसे लोग हैं जो ये कहते हैं कि ट्रेडिशन इतनी स्ट्रेट लाइन में कभी भी भारतीय परंपरा में नहीं रही, और हमारे लाखों सहस्त्र शास्त्र पुराण ग्रंथ, कितना साहित्य है, उसमें से करोड़ों चीजें तो खैर इस्लामियों ने जला के खाक कर दी. फिर उसके बाद अवहेलना की वजह से हाल ही के दशकों या इन द लास्ट सेंचुरी और 2 तो कितने तो दीमक खा गई. बहुत मुश्किल से रिकवर हो रहे हैं हमारे पुराने शास्त्र भी, और पुराने हमारे जो क्लासिक्स हैं, ओरिजिनल हैंड रिटन मैन्युस्क्रिप्ट्स, पाम लीफ पे लिखे हुए मैन्युस्क्रिप्ट्स. एक प्रयास तो चलना शुरू हुआ है पिछले कुछ दशकों में, और इनसे फिर एक नई रोशनी भी हमारे अतीत पर आ रही है. परंतु जो मौजूदा भी हैं उनमें भी भांति भांति के व्यूज हैं. कोई एक स्ट्रेट लाइन, स्ट्रेट जैकेट व्यू नहीं है. हमारे यहाँ कोई भी ऐसी परंपरा नहीं रही कि कोई आसमानी किताब है, वर्ड ऑफ गॉड है, कमांडमेंट्स दे रही है, दाउ शैल्ट नॉट डू दिस, या ये नहीं करोगे तो दोजख में जाओगे वगैरह वगैरह. वो सब नहीं है. तो इसलिए ज्यादा मेहनत करने की जरूरत है हमें. अगर हमारे टूटे बिखरे वुंडेड सिविलाइजेशन से रिश्ता जोड़ना है, अपने अतीत से रिश्ता जोड़ना है, तो जल्दबाजी का काम है ही नहीं. तो इसीलिए हम एक पूरी श्रृंखला कर रहे हैं डिबेट्स की, जिसमें द बेस्ट अवेलेबल स्कॉलर्स कम एंड टॉक with each other, discuss, debate, and bring you as much as they have been able to garner. तो आज हमारे साथ ये एको कहाँ से आ रही है, दो बहुत खास मेहमान जुड़ रहे हैं. एक तो डॉक्टर अरविंद राव, ये रिटायर्ड आईपीएस हैं, डायरेक्टर जनरल ऑफ पुलिस थे ये यूनाइटेड आंध्र प्रदेश स्टेट के, और बहुत इनका बहुत ही गजब का अनुभव है नक्सल इन्फेस्टेड एरियाज में काम करने का, उस समस्या से जूझने का. और बहुत जल्दी हमारे साथ उस विषय पर भी अरविंद राव जी बात करेंगे. परंतु इसके साथ साथ इनको संस्कृत भाषा से बहुत प्यार रहा, और इसके चलते इन्होंने संस्कृत का अध्ययन किया, बाकायदा पारंपरिक गुरुओं के साथ जुड़कर, और चलते चलते एक पीएचडी भी की है संस्कृत में. बहुत सी पुस्तकें हैं इनकी, इनका सीवी तो हमने दिया ही है, पर अगर आप सर्च करेंगे गूगल पे हमारे इस विशेष मेहमान डॉक्टर अरविंद राव जी के बारे में, तो आपको बहुत से लेक्चर्स भी इनके दिए हुए मिलेंगे, और पब्लिकेशंस भी और आर्टिकल्स भी. वेलकम Aravinda Rao ji, delighted to have you with us today. और साथ में जुड़ रहे हैं श्रीनिवास उडुमुडी जी, जो कि इंडिक एकेडमी के साथ करीब 5 साल तक उसके डायरेक्टर के रूप में जुड़े रहे, उनकी एकेडमिक स्टडीज को एंकर किया, और इनका बहुत गहरा इंटरेस्ट है भारतीय परंपराओं के साथ, कर्नाटक म्यूजिक, वेस्टर्न कॉन्टिनेंटल फिलॉसफी के साथ भी. और ये इनकी रोजी रोटी नहीं है, ये जो परंपरा की हम बात करते हैं, ये हमारे भारतीय ज्ञान परंपराओं की, ये इनका पैशन है. His profession, by profession, he's an entrepreneur heading India's premier genetics and genomics services and research organization based out of Hyderabad. So, two very special guests, two very learned guests. Welcome, Srinivas ji. So glad to have you, ji. So, let's get started with you, Dr. Aravinda Rao ji, on your view of this binary that has been created, and you're familiar with because you were part of that discussion that ensued following that program with Maitri Goswami, that very controversial program. तो बताइए इस विषय पर आप where do you position yourself?
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Madhuji, and thank you, Mr. Srinivas. If Mr. Srinivas has any questions to start with, so that may be okay. If there are no questions, I'll start off. If there are any questions, kindly.
No, Aravinda Rao, I think it's better you get maybe make an opening.
Something to start with.
Yes, yes. I think, and then we can come up with the questions later.
As Professor Madhuji said, I heard only one debate, debate about, from that Maitreyi ji. And there was a lot of interesting follow-up in our Google group. So only that I saw. And subsequent videos I have not seen. But anyway, I have some rough idea from our email, trail, that long list. So I have some idea about how things are being taken. So I will straight away get into the subject. So this is a very, very emotive subject, we all know, and there has been considerable unease in the minds of the people, particularly in the minds of among other people who have some reservations about what our texts say. And if we really examine the texts, neither the traditionalists will be happy, nor the people who actually oppose the tradition. Of course, Srinivas doesn't come under the category. I know pretty well that Srinivas is a staunch Hindu. So there's the people who want to demolish Hinduism, who want to demolish Hindutva, etc. So those people also will not be happy, nor the traditionalists will be happy, because the text, as you just now said, we have got an ocean of text. And from that ocean, if you just see in the ocean, you find sharks, you find whales, and you find all these things, and you find also great treasures. So like that, it is a mixed bag. So that is what we find in the text. And we have to see it with an open mind, because from both sides, we have to see it with an open mind, because there are certain uncomfortable things for both people. So that is one thing. And first of all, I just want to clarify two words, which of course most people will be knowing, but for my own satisfaction, I will clarify. One is Shruti and the other is Smriti. Shruti, of course, we say that it is a sort of Nishvasitameva tad Rigveda, Yajurveda, etc. It is a Nishvasitam of the Lord. That is, it has come like a sort of exhalation from the Brahma creator himself. Okay, traditionalists, they say like that. That is Shruti. Shruti is all the Vedas, all the four Vedas. Four Vedas, including the four parts of each Veda, that is Samhita, Brahmanam, Aranyakam, and Upanishad. All the four constitute one Veda. Then the second thing is Smriti. Here, the Smriti, we have got two categories. One is the Itihasa and Purana are one category. Itihasa, of course, we have got only two Itihasas and several Puranas. They fall under one category. And the Dharma Shastras, they fall under the other category. Dharma Shastras like the Manusmriti, Parashara Smriti, Shankalikita Smriti, Narada Smriti, etc., they fall under another category. So in the Smritis, we have got two types. Shruti, of course, there is only one category. So this is the picture. Then Itihasas and Purana, the difference between these two things are two types of Smritis are the Itihasa and Purana, they give some live examples. For example, Veda, if you consider Vedas like a work of law, a textbook of law, then these books are like a case law. They give live examples. So Veda says Satyam Vada, Ahimsa, Dharmanchara, or something like Ahimsa, Dhanam, Tapa, etc., etc. So we have got stories, corresponding stories to illustrate each and every thing which has been told in the Veda. So they are like the case laws. So, but then ethical codes like Manusmriti, Parashara Smriti, etc., they don't have any live examples. They are like, again, somewhat like textbooks of law, because they have got mainly three parts. That is, one is Achara Kanda. Achara Kanda, how we have to conduct ourselves, various people have to conduct themselves and where they stand in the social structure, etc. Then the second one is Vyavahara Kanda. When there are some disputes, maybe civil disputes or criminal disputes, that how these Vyavaharas have to be handled. The other one is Prayaschitta Kanda. Prayaschitta is some sort of expiatory work, not work, expiatory karma, which the person does. It is not, he is answerable to himself, answerable to no one else. So only he knows whatever, wrong he has done, and then he does some prayaschitta for that. So these three are broadly the main parts in all these smritis. So this is the structure of these things. And let us see a few examples. And I don't claim to have done a very exhaustive study on these things. Whatever little I have done, I will try to put forth. So regarding this Varna, first we'll take up this subject called Varna. And where do we get this first? If we see the Vedas, the first thing or the most controversial thing we come across is that one line from the Rig Veda, Brahmanosya Mahamasit Bahu Rajanya Krutaha Uru Tadasya Yadvaishyaha Padyagam Shodro Ajayata. So that is the mantra. Out of the 10,000 mantras, this is one mantra which has created a lot of trouble to all of us. So what does it mean? What does this shloka mean? Not this particular shloka, this entire Purusha Sukta. Purusha Sukta is a sort of visualization of the whole universe, or not universe, the entire creation, let us say. The whole creation as one organic entity. It is actually Sahasra Shirusha Purusha means, if you see the Sayanacharya's Bhashyam, there he writes all the heads and all the limbs. Heads means all the antahkaranas and all the limbs. That means all the sense organs and all the antahkaranas of all the living beings are the heads of that Virat Purusha. We have to visualize like that. I am not different from that. I am a part and parcel, a small part of that. So visualizing the whole creation as one organic entity. So that is meant for meditation. We are supposed to meditate on that in order to attain a sort of Sarvatma Bhava. What all exists is one. There is only one reality which is existing. Sarvani Rupani Vichitya Thiraha. That mantras, there are so many mantras like that. Sarvani Rupani Vichitya Thiraha Namani Kutva Bhivatanyadaste. The same one entity has taken so many forms. So that visualization. And in the middle also, there are words like Yat Purusham Yadadhuhu Katidha Vyakalpayam Katidha Vyakalpayam. But that means in how many ways they visualize. Kalpana means visualization. Katidha Vyakalpayam means in how many ways they visualize it. So it is basically a sort of visualization. It is a sort of metaphor and not a reality. But unfortunately, subsequent writers, they have been saying, either in Purana, so Brahmana means Mukhajata. That is somebody who has come from the Mukha. Though the grammar doesn't say that. Grammar only says, Brahmana asya mukham asit. Brahmana, he just became, he was like the face, or rather the head. Mukham, basically mouth actually. Mukha in Sanskrit actually means mouth. So Brahmana was somewhat like a mouthpiece for the society or for that creation. So it is a metaphor. But unfortunately, later texts also many people they have interpreted, even in the traditional in the people in the tradition, they have interpreted that Brahmana has come from the head and then Kshatriya from the shoulders, etc., etc. So this is one thing which we find. Then, if we see the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there is again the mention about how these Varnas evolved. This Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, I will just read. That is chapter 1 and the fourth Brahmana. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is divided into so many Brahmanas. Brahmana is a sort of sub-chapter, chapter, let us say. Chapter 1 and sub-chapter 4. It is called Brahmavidya Brahmana and mantra number 10. So there it's 1-4-10. So there it says, Brahmava idamagra asit ekameva. So that is, I will not go into all these details. That is, there was only one thing called, the one Varna called Brahma. Brahma means Brahmana. There was only one Varna, that is Brahmana. Tat ekam san na vyabhavat. Tat na vyabhavat. Vaibhav, there was no Vaibhava in that. That means it did not accomplish anything which was magnificent. There was only one Varna and then they could not achieve much. Tat Shreyo Rupa Matyasrajata Kshatram. Shreyo Rupa Matyasrajata Kshatram means the Kshatriya. So from them, one group emerged as the Kshatriyas. So initially there was only one, and then from that they emerged one. They created, or rather, some people they broke off and then became Kshatra. And that Kshatra, he is the man who wields the power. Tasmat Brahmana Kshatriyam Adhastad Upaste. Brahmana stands on the ground and then worships, or rather respects the Kshatriya who is sitting on a chair. Brahmana Kshatriyam Adhastad Upaste. Adhastad, he is standing below and then he is worshipping, or rather respecting the king. Then from that, even then, Sanaiva Vyabhavat, even that structure did not do anything. There was no Vaibhava. Tanna Vyabhavat means they did not accomplish any magnificent thing. So Visham Asrujata. Visham Asrujata means they created the Vaishyas. So that, and again here it also says that even among gods there are some Kshatriyas, even among gods there are some Vaishyas, etc. Depending on their, we see in the Puranas, we find various allocation of duties even for gods. So whatever is applicable there is applicable here also. Then sa naiva vyabhavat shreyo rupa matyasrujata dharmam. No, after that, then sa naiva vyabhavat shaudram varnam asrujata. Then even that Vaishya was not adequate. So they created another varna called shaudram varnam. That is that shudra varnam. Pushana viyamcha. Bhushanam is that which nourishes everybody. The Shudra is somebody who, the caste, or not caste, it is a Varna, which is the group which nourishes all of the people. Even this four-fold division was not enough. They again created Sanaiva Vyabhavat Tat Shreyo Rupa Matyasrujata Dharmam Tadetat Kshatrasya Kshatram. The final evolution was Dharma. Dharma means that which governs all the four varnas. It is somewhat like the constitution, let us say. It is somewhat on par with the constitution. Tadetat Kshatrasya Kshatram. That is the
Please
Kshatriya.
don't compare it to the constitution. My
Sorry.
humble appeal, please. Let's not bring in the constitution. It's not even
Okay,
really drafted by our own
no problem.
people. And so,
No
anyway,
problem. In fact, yeah. Because I was just thinking that in every system there is a need for some checks and balances. So in olden days, what was the check on the
but this
king?
has
The check
failed.
on the king was the dharma.
This constitution has been amended 1,000 something times. It has failed us
Yeah.
drastically. It deserves to be in the garbage bin because it has not fulfilled its purpose one bit. Whereas our dharmic tradition, so long as it prevailed, we were actually the leading power in the world, economically, mm, spiritually, scientifically, in terms of production, in terms of economy, management of families, management of samaj. So please let's not compare. The two are
Yeah, fine.
as different as
Fine,
they
fine.
ever
I'll
have.
not get. I'll not get. I agree, and then I will not get into that. Then after this Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we find some other examples in the Vedas, and also in the Vedas we find that the Brahmana Kshatriya, that they are so close that there are quite often intermarriages. There is some Brahmins' sons, some of them become Kshatriyas, and some of the Kshatriya people, their sons become Brahmanas. So it is like that. But I'll get to that examples again. Then again, meanwhile, the Sankhya doctrine also is there. There is a Sankhya doctrine which talks about the three gunas, the Sattva guna, Rajo guna, and Tamo guna. Sattva guna, I need not explain because many people have got some broad idea. So depending on the the predominance of a guna in a particular person, there can be some sort of personality division. So Vyasa accepted this Sankhya principle and introduced it in the Mahabharata. I don't know. I don't think it was there in the say the division which was made earlier. For example, when Rigveda said Brahmanosya Makhamasit, or rather when Brihadaranyaka Upanishad said only there was only one Varna, and then from there all other things came out. We do not know how exactly there was the division of work was there. But then when Vyasa came, Vyasa we find was a very great social reformer. So Vyasa basically is a Rishi who was involved in, who was interested in creating a structure which would be a sort of cultural vision for the whole nation. So he accepted this principle of these three gunas, and then he regulated that varna structure. And that is what we find in this Bhagavad Gita. For example, Chaturvarnyam Maya Sashtam Gunakarma Vibhagashaha. He is saying that the four gunas and the four varnas, they have been created on the basis of Created in the sense it is part and parcel of the Prakriti. Because in the very next line he says, I am not the Karta. So that means Prakriti is like that. The nature is like that. There are three gunas, and three gunas they mix in various proportions in order to make these four broad categories. And there the commentators have very clearly said, Sattva-guna pradhanaha brahmanaha. When the Sattva-guna is predominant, he can be called a brahmana. It doesn't mean that he is 100% Sattva-guna. There is Rajoguna and also Tamoguna. No one is 100% Sattva-guna, no one is 100% Rajoguna, etc. Then the other person where Sattva-guna becomes secondary, then Rajoguna becomes primary, he was called a Kshatriya. And then again, when Rajoguna is primary and Tamoguna is secondary, he was called Vaishya. And then when Tamoguna was primary, he was called Shudra. So in that we find that sort of explanation in the commentaries. In the commentaries, Rajoguna Pradhanasya, Sattva Upasarjana Rajak Pradhanasya Kshatrasya. So somewhat like that, it goes on. Then again, this was also accepted by Manusmriti, if we see the second chapter, 148. Probably by Manu's time also, probably things were rather fluid, and there was a need for some system to place a man in a particular varna, to place a particular person in a particular varna. So the teacher used to examine. The teacher used to examine a boy, see his general say aptitude, and then his general say knowledge. We can't say general knowledge for a boy of 7 or 8. So somehow the acharya used to judge. Like nowadays also we put some small tests for the children. So he used to test, and then he used to say, okay, this boy is fit to be in the Brahmana Varna. This boy is fit to be in the Kshatriya Varna. So like that, Manusmriti says, Acharyastvasya yam jatim vidhivat Vedaparaga. A person who is a Vedaparaga, a person, a highly learned Brahmin, he will examine that boy, and then Utpadayati Savitriya, and then he teaches this Gayatri mantra, and then he says, okay, you be in this varna, you be in this varna. Sa Satya, Sa Jara, Amara. That is shloka number 2-148. But somehow that system fell into disuse. We don't come across the continuance of that system. Maybe we don't know what is the reason, and maybe due to the environmental advantage, heredity and environment. If we see that environmental advantage which the Brahmin boys had, so that probably it gave an impression that, okay, let this fellow continue in this varna. Maybe that is the reason. Or due to the enormity of that task, because any number of people had to be examined and any number of examiners are needed, and then they had to place all these people. So somehow that heredity continued. Heredity continued, and then the idea of a teacher testing and putting a man in a particular varna, it stopped. Then again, Mahabharata, of course, Gita, that 4-13, Chaturvarnyamaya Sushtam, Guna Karma Vibhagashaha. He is saying Guna Karma Vibhagashaha and not Jati. He is only talking about Sattva-guna, Rajoguna, and Tamoguna, and not about Jati. And again, we find in the 41st shloka of 18th chapter, 41st shloka, it says that it's a Brahmana Kshatriya Visham Shudranancha Parantapa. Karmani Pravibhaktani Swabhava Prabhavair Gunai. It says Brahmana Kshatriya Visham Shudranancha. For all these people, for all the four varnas, we have divided karma, their duties. How? Karmani Pravibhaktani. That means all the karmas have been divided. How? Swabhava Prabhavair Gunai. Swabhava Prabhavair Gunai means the gunas which are part of their personality. That is, which the gunas which they have inherited. So if somebody's son, Brahmana's son, is not having the Brahmana qualities, he has to go to some other varna. If a Kshatriya's son is not having Kshatriya guna, and if he is having some other gunas, he has to go to some other varna. So this is repeatedly made clear in Mahabharata in several places, and particularly in say Yaksha Prashna, Nahusha Prashna, etc. I'll read out a couple of shlokas from this Nahusha Prashna. We know this episode of Nahusha, when these Pandavas they were doing Vanavas. Bhima on one day he goes out into the forest and he was caught by a huge python. That huge python was a very great king called Nahusha, who was for some time in charge of Indra's post, and then he was cursed by sages, and then he fell down onto the earth, and then he was in the shape of a huge python, and he was more powerful than Bhima by virtue of that shap. And when that huge python caught him, and then it was about to devour him, then Dharmaraja goes there, and then he asks that python. So that python says, "Yes, if you can answer my questions, I will release this man. Whoever answers these questions." Okay. Then there is an interesting debate, and the main discussion is about who is a Brahmana. It only shows Mahabharata in so many places there is a reference to who is a Brahmana. It shows that even at the time of Mahabharata, there was some debate about as much debate as we are having now about who should be a Brahmana. A Brahmana's son, will he automatically become a Brahmana? So there was always an emphasis that a Brahmana has to live up to that standard. If he doesn't live up to that standard, he will fall. So that sort of pressure was always there. So here again, then again we see the Dharmaraja very clearly says, Shudre tu yad bhavel lakshma dvijetacha navidyate navai shudro bhavet shudro brahmano nasha brahmana. So he says, the wherever the gunas like Satyam, Danam, Kshama, Sheelam, etc., Drishyante, Yatra, Nage, Nagendra, Sab Brahmana iti smrataha. That is Nahusha Prashna, Adhyaya, that is Vanaparva, Adhyaya number 180, Shloka number 21, 22, 23 onwards, Shloka 180, Adhyaya 180 of Vanaparva. So where these characters are there, these characteristics are there, only then such person can be called.
May I request you, sir, to repeat it calmly because people need to hear this part very carefully. I found this a very moving chapter, and and therefore it's important that people hear you. You seem to want to rush because you think there's limited time. I understand, but repeat this slowly, sir.
Yeah, one or two more slokas. And
Yeah.
he very clearly says, where these qualities are seen, that person is a Brahmana. Yatraitat na bhavet sarpa, tam shudramiti nirdishet. Where these qualities are not found, you have to designate him as a Shudra. Then again,
No, but please
then
mention
finally,
the
Yudhishthira.
qualities. Please mention the qualities, sir. It's important that list
Yeah,
of
qualities.
qualities.
Yeah, qualities. I'll just come back because I thought I will be reading too many slokas. Satyam, Danam, Kshama, Sheelam, Andrushamsyam, Tapo, Gruna. Satyam, truthfulness, Danam, charity. Though the Brahmana was not a very rich person, he was whatever he had, he was supposed to give charity. Kshama is forbearance. Whatever, even if something happens to him, he is able to tolerate. He is able to forgive it. Then Sheelam, character. Andrushamsyam, total absence of any sort of violent behavior. Andrushamsyam. Tapaha is a tendency to contemplate, to think, and then that is tapaha. The word tapa means tapa alochane. Tapa means contemplating, thinking, knowing about truth, quest for truth. Gruna, that is compassion. All these things. Drishyante yatra nagendra sab brahmana iti smataha. Where all these things are seen. Then again that Nagendra asks, oh, these things are seen even in other places, even in other people. What do you call about them? Then Dharmaraja says, yes, where these qualities are seen, that person is a Brahmana. Then again, Yudhishthira, finally, after all this discussion, he says, there is so much of Varna Sankara. This is a very interesting shloka, 31st shloka of the same chapter. Jatiratra Mahasarpa, Manushyatve Mahamate, Sankarat Sarvavarnanam, Dushparikshiyeti me matihi. This is Sankarat Sarvavarnanam. All these Varnas, this Varna Sankaryam has taken place so much. This jati is dushparikshya, something which cannot be decided. You cannot say there is so much of varna sankara. So we have to only see the characteristics, and then say he is a brahmana. But we can't say it straight away from the jati. You can't say from the jati. You have to see the qualities and then say that he belongs to this particular varna. So this is one thing. And finally, after all this discussion again, there is a last shloka where again he says, Brahmajnanam is something which is for which everybody is eligible. Brahmajnana is something for which everybody is eligible. What are they? These qualities, if these qualities are there, Satyam, Damaha, Tapo, Danam, Ahimsa, Dharma Nityata. Sadhakani sada pumsam na jatihi na kulam nrupa. This last pada, na jatihi na kulam, not jati, not kulam. These qualities, these enable a person or these qualify a person for Brahmajnana. So for Brahmajnana, everybody is eligible. So this is how this Nahusha Prashna goes on. Then again, if you see this Dvija also we have to see the word. We normally think that Dvija only refers to Brahmins. But Dvija refers to all the people for whom this Yajnopavita is, that ceremony is done. That is Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya. All the three Varnas, they are called the Dvijas, not only Brahmins. And these people, who are these Brahmana and Kshatriya, there is some clarity. But Vaishya, who are the Vaishyas? The Gita says, Krushi Gaurakshiya Vanijyam Vaishya Karma Swabhavajam. Again, 18th chapter, I think, sloka number 40 or 41. Krushi Gaurakshiya Vanijyam Vaishya Karma Swabhavajam. That is Krushi, the agriculture. All the agriculturists of that time. So they were the Vaishyas. Then again, Gaurakshiya. Gaurakshiya means cattle rearing. That is Gopala, all the Gopalas, including Lord Krishna. Lord Krishna, by that definition, he was a Vaishya. And he also went to Sandipani Muni and then he learnt Vedas. And then Krushi Gaurakshiya, Vanijyam, all types of trades, all the traders, all these three categories are also, they constitute the Vaishya Varna. So which means Brahmana, Kshatriya and all these people probably constituted about 80% of the society in any society. And the last category was the Shudras. And the only distinction was Shudras, they were not reading Vedas, but then they were entitled to read all other texts. In fact, I was also thinking before studying Sanskrit, I was also under the impression that even Sanskrit was denied to them. It is not so. All the other texts, except the Vedas. Even in the Vedas, teaching was the domain of the Brahmana. Teaching Veda was the domain of Brahmana. Though Brahmana, Kshatriya, and Vaishya, they were all the people they were eligible to study the Vedas and all the other Shastras. But the Shudra was was allowed to read all other Shastras and also Itihasa, Purana, everything. Because if you see Ramayana in the very first Sarga, the last shloka of the first Sarga, it says, Pathan Vijo Vagrushapatvamiyat Syat Kshatriyo Bhumipatittvamiyat. It goes like that. And the last line says, Janascha Shudropi Mahatvamiya. A Shudra who reads this, he will become a great person. So it very clearly shows that it is meant for the Shudras. And even Vyasa makes it very, very clear. Itihasa Purana Bhyam Vedam Samupagurmhayat. He says in the very first chapter of the Mahabharata, he says, the vision of the Veda has to be taken to the people, has to be elaborated. Upabrahmayet. Upabrahmana means that is expanding, not even expanding, it is taking to people, to a large number of people. It has to be broadcast, let us say, to a large number of people.
Outreach.
And Itihasa and
Outreach.
yes, that knowledge has to be spread. The Vedic vision had to be spread among people. So, and Itihasa and Purana were the means. So that is what Vyasa says. And they were meant for all the Varnas. You see, any Vratam, all the Vratams which we see, Chaturvarnim, it is for all the Varnas, all the things they very clearly say. So that is one aspect. Then when it is like that, then what is caste? Caste, it is a natural sociological evolution. That is what we see. Because there is a mention of caste even in Veda. There is no mention about any creation of caste. There is a mention of caste. For example,
How can caste be there, sir? Caste तो शब्द ही
sorry,
हमारा नहीं है. How could caste
Haji?
be? How could there be mention of caste? That's not our vocabulary. You mean
Of course.
jati
Okay, then
or
we see.
what?
Okay,
Let's
let us use the word
not
jati. Okay, let us use the
horrible
word
word.
jati. I'll
This
use
is
the
a
word kulam. No, not even
yes,
jati. I will use
yes,
the word
yes,
kulam.
yes.
Kulam actually is a group. Kulam. In fact, if you go to Kulu and Manali, that is supposed to be the Kulanta Desha or something. Kulam is a habitation. Kula is a place habitation. Kulam is you can say a community. Kulam is a community. Jati means the very root. Ja means born. So Jati is something which is hereditary, and Jati means Brahmana Jati, Kshatriya Jati, etc., etc. Kulam is say occupational group. So this kulam, if we see, it is a natural evolution. If we see Rudram, we have all, when we go to temples or anywhere, we see Rudram there. There, that again is a visualization. Rudram is a sort of meditation, is a sort of contemplation to see Brahman or to see divinity in everybody. So there it says Namo Isukrutyah Dhanvakrudhyasya Namo. So there is all there is a mention of all animals, all things, all traits, and then all people belonging to all traits. And then it says Namo Isukrutyah, the people who used to make arrows, and the people who used to make bows, the people who used to make rathakarebhyasya namo, kulalebhyasya namo, karmarebhyasya namo. Kulalaha is a potter, karmaraha is an ironsmith, and similarly goldsmith, and all the people in the society are mentioned, and then we are asked to contemplate, we are asked to see divinity in all the beings. So that is what is Rudra Adhyaya. So most of our suktas, they are meant for contemplation of this oneness. So, and again, the word Chandala is not there in the Samhita portion of any Veda. The Vedas have got 4 parts of Samhita: Brahmanam, Aranyakam, and Upanishad. I got it checked up in Samhita, because all the 4 Samhitas are read by the Arya Samaj people. So an Arya Samaj friend of mine who actually prepared the entire text, all these digital texts, he verified the digital text and confirmed to me that the word Chandala, Chanda, Chanda, it is nowhere there in the Samhita portion. So in the Brahmanas, I am not sure, I have not verified. But in the Upanishads, I know that in the Chandogya Upanishad, there is a mention of the word Chandala. Chandogya Upanishad, Sukara Yonim va, Chandala Yonim va, the mantra goes like that: Ramaniya Sharanaha, Ramaniyam Yonima Patyeram. All the people who have got excellent conduct, they take excellent births, and then the excellent womb, let us say. And then those people who have got very despicable character, so they go to some despicable wombs. Kapuyam Yonima Patyeram. So somewhat it goes like that. So that is that word Chandala, Chandala Yonimva, Sukara Yonimva, it says. So that word Chandala is there in the Upanishad. So that we have to note. Then again, Manusmriti, again, if we see, Manusmriti did not create caste. We can very, very firmly say. Manusmriti talks about certain caste. Chapter 10 of Manusmriti, if we see, the idea of Manusmriti is basically to see that there is to discourage Varna Sankara, And in the chapter 10, they only say the people who are born in that inter-Varna marriage, so they will go to a particular kulam, not caste, kulam. They will go to a particular kulam. So the Brahmana woman, if she marries a Shudra, then a person called Chandala is born. So Chandala is half Brahmana, we have to say. Chandala, what we call Chandala, is actually a half Brahmana. Then again, like that, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Strayo, Varna, Dvijataya, Chaturtha, Ekajatistu, Shudro, Nasti, Shudro, Ekajatistu, Shudro, Nastitu, Panchamaha. There are only 4 Varnas, there is no 5th Varna, he says. But when it comes to castes, Kulam, the Kulas are already existing in the society. So what Manu does is basically to put a particular person, depending on the gravity of the offense, from his point of view. I'm not talking from our point of view. From his point of view, depending on the gravity of the case, suppose a Brahmana woman going with a Shudra person, that was the most despicable thing. So the person who was born was put in that Chandala category. Suppose a Brahmana woman goes with a Kshatriya, there is some small concession. So that person becomes a Suta. Becomes a Suta means already Suta were there. Suta is a charioteer. That charioteer class was already there in the society. It's not created by Manu. Similarly, some forester, some Nishada, they were already there. Or some other potter, they were already there. So all these existing kulam. So what Manu did was to place all these people into those categories, depending on the gravity of whatever he thought was, serious. He put them in those varnas, in those kulams. So that is what we see. And Manu, we have to note that he was a king. He was not a Brahmana. Manu himself, he was a king. He was a Kshatriya. Then again, we see that the Smritis, about Smritis, I just want to say that the Smritis, they were actually never followed by us. our conduct and character in the society was guided more by Ramayana and Mahabharata, not by Manusmriti, Parashara Smriti, etc., etc. If we want to see the examples, there are so many examples where we have never followed any dictum of that Smriti. For example, I'll give a few examples. For example, Acharya could decide the Varna. Acharya, I just now quoted this shloka. This was not implemented. Then Brahmana had to offer meat to his ancestors during the Shraddha. We have never done it. I have never heard it in South India, at least. Maybe some parts. I am told that some parts in northern UP and some other places that practice is there. But then this Brahmin was supposed to offer meat to his ancestors during Shraddha, and particularly a goat or a deer or a stag. They were the most preferred animals. This is never done. Then again, Brahmin could eat 5 types of animals. So that is also never done. Then Brahmin could marry from all the 4 Varnas. That is also not done. And in fact, most of our Purohitas, all the young Purohits, they are going unmarried. No Brahmin girl is marrying any Purohita, any Archaka in a temple. So most of the fellows are going, they are not finding wives. And if we ask them, why don't you marry? Manusmriti says, you please follow that Manusmriti. They are afraid to follow Manusmriti. So they don't want to follow Manusmriti also. And the Brahmin he was not supposed to eat cooked food from Shudra, but he could take all the dairy products, and not only dairy products, but also raw meat. He could take even raw meat from a Shudra, but he was not supposed to eat cooked food. Then Manusmriti and also in Apastamba Dharma Smriti also it says the same thing. So that is the one. That is why in the Mahabharata there is a story where one Brahmin goes to Dharmavyadha, who was a meat seller. In fact, I was wondering how this Brahmin went to a meat seller. So meat was not a taboo. Meat was not a taboo. And then Brahmin was also taking meat, raw meat from the meat sellers. So that is how I later understood it. Then again, uh, that there was a niyoga system. We all know that niyoga system, where appointing the younger brother was asked to beget children if the husband of a woman died, probably to see that she would not go astray or maybe to protect the property, whatever were the sociological reasons. That niyoga system is not followed now. Then again, widow remarriage is there. In Manusmriti also, widow remarriage is there. Surprisingly, we never knew. But Manusmriti says, and Parashara Smriti more specifically says, Parashara Smriti more specifically says, that is, I'll read out that Parashara Smriti 45. Yeah. So Parashara Smriti says, this is a book called Ashtadasha Smriti. So Nashte Mrate Pravrajite Klibe Cha Patite Pato Pancha Swapatsu Narinam Patiranyo Vidhiyate. That is when a person is whose whereabouts are not traced. In olden days, they used to travel a lot and then they used to go out for, to other places. And Nashte, and when the person is not traced, then Mrute, when a person is dead, Pravrajite, or when he becomes a sannyasi, or Klibe, when he is impotent, or patite patau, when he falls into say evil ways. So then the wife can marry, she can remarry. Panchasu apatsu narinam patihi anyo vidhiyate. It is Parashara Smriti, and we are not following it. And we have always been saying that widow remarriage is not there, widow remarriage is not there, and we have been trained like that. But if we see our Smritis, even Manu says there is a widow marriage. Parashara more clearly says widow remarriage. And in the Kali Yuga, we are supposed to follow Parashara Smriti. Kalau Parashara Smriti. Again, Smriti again changes from time to time. In the Krita Yuga, it was supposed to be Manusmriti. Manusmriti is not meant for our time. Manusmriti was the Smriti for the earliest period, that is Krita Yuga. Krutautu Manava Dharma Tretayam Narada Smriti. In Treta, Narada Smriti. Dwapare Shankhalikitau. Dwapara, in the Dwapara period, Shankhalikita Smriti and Kalau Parashara Smriti. So that is what it says. In fact, that is also a shloka from one of the Smritis only. So again, the Smritis, they change from time to time. That point also is there. So this is also we are not following this widow remarriage. Then there is harsh corporal punishment to Shudras. There is the eighth chapter of Manusmriti, chapter 8, shloka number 270, 271, 272, etc. We see. that is cutting off the tongue of a Shudra, then again branding the tongue for telling lies, and then abusing one Brahmana or anybody, upper Varna person, then pouring hot oil into the ears. Hot lead is not there, hot oil. In Manusmriti, it is only hot oil. But it seems in some other place, in some other Dharma Shastra, pouring lead also is there. And that we see quoted by Shankaracharya. Quoted by Shankaracharya in one of his commentaries. It seems the Gautama Dharma Sutra says that molten lead has to be poured into the person, but Manusmriti says molten oil. Okay, equally bad. Then again, untouchability is something not told in the
No, no,
Manusmriti.
wait a minute,
Untouchability,
wait a minute. This can't be left hanging like that. You need to explain, was this actually done, or is it a stray reference which nobody really took seriously? I think that needs to be established first before we
yeah,
go on to
yeah,
other things.
no.
I think is this
Yeah,
the
yeah,
most
shlokas are
important
all,
part, because
yeah,
this
shlokas,
is the
shlokas
kind of
are all here. I
stuff
have got the
that
Manusmriti.
they flagellate us with.
Yeah,
So you
yeah, I
can't
have
leave
the
it that
Manusmriti.
way. Please tell me.
No, no, no. Yeah, I have got the Manusmriti in front of me. I'll read out the
No,
shlokas.
that Manusmriti may or may not say it. The point is there
Hmm.
any instance recorded of a Shudra or anybody in whose ear hot oil or molten lead was ever poured? Is there a recorded instance? Anybody saw it, mentioned it? Is there a person it happened to?
Yeah,
Or
that is what I am about to, I am about to say that. I am about to say that there is no such record anywhere. Only Manusmriti says in history we don't find in history we don't come across anywhere in the entire Sanskrit literature, either in Hindu texts or in the Buddhist texts. In fact, I checked up with the Buddhists also. Even in the Buddhist texts, they have not traced any story where it is said that molten lead was poured or anything like that. Maybe if Srinivas knows something, or if I'm subject to correction, I checked up one from my Buddhist friend of mine, whether it is there in any Buddhist text. And we have got so many foreign travelers who have come to India, and even in their writings, we don't come across any such instance. So this is not found in our text. It is not found in Buddhist text, to my knowledge, and it is not certainly if it were to be there in some other foreign travelers' notes. Definitely, all our people would have pointed it out. So there doesn't seem to be any record of this. Like we find so much of record about the Spanish Inquisition, millions, I mean, lakhs and lakhs of people were burnt at stake. So that till right up to 19th century, that was happening. So we don't have any such record. So, but then it is there on paper. It is there. Then
no,
again,
but there's
untouchability for
also
the first
one,
time
if you
is
can just
mentioned in.
clarify one small point, sir. There's also a lot of dispute about the authenticity of the Manusmriti edition that has been passed on to our generation. In fact, Dharampalji had a lot of questions about it, and from him, I actually picked up my interest in this text. So, what do you say about, is it 100% authentic? Everything in that is just right and perfect? Is it a certified text that you're using, or are there questions about its its 100% purity, the text that's being currently used?
Yeah, we cannot say, even if we want, even if we say that it is tampered with. I do not know, because I have not done a textual criticism. I have not done, I mean, studied any textual criticism. Nowadays, that is again a very important study, whether the text is real, whatever text has come down to us, whether the text is authentic or not. That is an important aspect of the, I mean, in criticism. I have not studied that regarding Manusmriti. I am only seeing the text as it is available, along with that Kulluka Bhatta commentary. I have got a book with Kulluka Bhatta commentary, and
Can
whether it
I?
is Medhatithi commentary or any other commentary, they are following only this text. At least, so which means that at least for the past few hundred years, the text is there. Maybe if it was tampered a few thousand years ago. We do not know, and we don't find any great contradiction, because all through the same tone is there. The same tone is there. Maybe some additions could have been there. And I told you that this Manusmriti is not for this Yuga. It was meant for Krita Yuga. It was basically meant for Krita Yuga. And that means many thousands of years ago. And probably the British people, they wanted to identify one book which can define the Hindus. And unfortunately, if we define ourselves under this particular text, we will be falling into the trap of the Europeans or the people who want to demolish Hinduism will be falling into their trap if we define ourselves as followers of this particular text. So I don't think we ever followed, because I just gave a number of instances where we have never followed. We have not even heard till they say that, yeah, you are all the followers of Manu. Then okay, we'll come across and then we'll open the text and then see, we never followed this, we never knew this. So untouchability also is not there, is not mentioned anywhere in Manu. But then it is mentioned in Apastamba. Apastamba seems to be very particular. Apastamba Dharma Sutra, he is very harsh. He is very particular. Harsh with Brahmins. He is not harsh with the person. If a Brahmin touches a Shudra, the Shudra is not being punished, but then the Brahmana is undergoing so much of punishment. That is why he has to do so much of Prayaschitta and whatnot. So Kruchra, Chandrayana, all those Vratams he has to do. Then again, there is a strict regimen for Brahmin, which also is not being followed. That is studying of the Vedas, teaching of the Vedas, and on that count, if we really want to identify Brahmins, we may have to count them on fingers. So you don't find real Brahmins according as per the standards of Manusmriti or as per the standards of any other Smriti also, because there are such a strict regimen. Then again, there is no mention about in any Smriti coming to this point of, lifting of night soil and things like that. There is no such profession anywhere. I again checked up with some senior, very experienced pundits. So very, very clearly, we can say that there was no such kulam which was designated to lift this night soil. There was no such kulam, there was no such profession, because in the Dharma Shastras, there is also a mention of where people have to go for defecation. Malasthana Nirnaya Vidhi. So in all these Dharma Shastras, like Dharma Sindhu and Nirnaya Sindhu, they also mention about what a Brahmin has to do when he passes urine, when he passes excrement. So there, I have not exactly got the reference, but that particular portion also is there. People used to go out because of this open defecation and all that, where there was no need. So that is the reason why big cities were not encouraged. Only small villages were encouraged. So this is what we find. There is no mention of in any Smriti also. I checked up in the Smritis, and most of the Smritis, though there is no mention of Kulam also. Only in Manusmriti there is a mention of Kulam. In many Smritis there is a mention of
No, sir.
Varna, but there is no mention of Kulam. Then
And
again,
maybe I'll
probably
bring it up
this
later,
night
sir, but
soil,
in
lifting of night
Yajnavalkya
soil.
Smriti it is there, sir.
Sorry?
In Yajnavalkya Smriti there is a reference to Jati, but I will bring it up later on, sir. You please continue.
Yeah, Jati. Yajnavalkya Smriti, the reference to Jati means that is Kulam, this night soil business. Not night soil, I suppose.
No night soil.
As a concept, as a Jati
Yeah,
as a concept,
yeah.
in opposition to Varna concept, it's very clearly
Yajnavalkya
mentioned.
Smriti also is exactly. Yajnavalkya Smriti, of course, there is a mention. So these are all the things about the Smritis. And there are also very many positive points, very many positive aspects in all our Itihasas and Puranas, because we find several stories in Mahabharata where a Chandala becomes a Brahmana, So I can give, there is one book called Chaturvarnya Bharata Samiksha. I request people who know Sanskrit to read this book. Unfortunately, no one has translated this book into English. This is called Chaturvarnya Bharata Samiksha. It is by Maheshwaranandagiri Mahamandaleshwara. Swami Maheshwaranandagiri Mahamandaleshwara. Haridwar Kanakala Vastavya. Kanakala, Haridwar, there is a place called Kanakal, and then the Swamiji is a Pithadipati of the place. And then this Swamiji has given so many references. It is a wonderful, it is not a small book, it is only part one. There are 3 parts. And then here, he gives so many examples. So, for example, he says, he quotes from again Mahabharata, where the Shanti Parva, where he says, the same Brahmanas because their standards had fallen. Because of the fallen standards, they became Shudras. He writes, Kamobhoga Priyaha, Tikshnaha, Krodhanaha, Priyasahasaha. The people who were interested in bhogas, enjoyment, then Tikshnaha, very rough people, and then very harsh people, Krodhanaha, very angry in temperament. So those people, Shura, Virascha, Raktangaha, Tedvijar, Kshatratangataha. So those people, they became Kshatriyas. So those among the same Brahmanas, those people who were very harsh and then very Krodhanas, very angry in temperament, and Priya Sahasaha, those who could do Sahasam. So such people, they became Kshatriyas. And Gobhyo Vrittim Samasthaya. Then some people who were interested in this cow rearing, etc., they became Vaishyas. Then again, Shaucha Paribhrashtaha, Krishnaha Shaucha Paribhrashtaha, Tedvija Shudratangataha. So Shaucha Paribhrashtaha, those who gave up their Shaucha, cleanliness, because the people who totally ignored their cleanliness, they became Shudraha. So he says like that. Then there are several examples we can see. I will just take out. If there is time, I will take out. For example, one person called Dev, in Mahabharata, there is a character called Devapi, who is the elder brother of Shantanu. So that elder Shantanu, we know he is a Kshatriya. But then this Devapi becomes a Brahmana. Devapi renounces and then he becomes a Brahmana. And when there was an occasion in Shantanu's time, when Shantanu was ruling, when there was a serious drought for about 12 years, this Devapi comes and performs a yajna for his younger brother. And then, of course, it rains. So that is the story. Then there is an example of Vishwamitra. Vishwamitra, how he becomes a Brahmana. So that also is there. Tato Brahmanatam yato Vishwamitro Mahatapaha. From Vishwamitra, a Kshatriya, he became a Brahmana. We see it in Ramayana and also in Mahabharata. Then again in Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a case where there is a king called Rishabhadeva. That Rishabhadeva, so those, he had about 100 sons. Ekashiti Sankhyakanam Rajashri Rishabhadeva. There Rajarshi Rishabhadeva, his sons, some people, they became Brahmanas, and some other people, they became Kshatriyas. Karma Vishuddha, Brahmana Babhu. Some people, they became Brahmana. Then again, they became Mahashalinaha. Mahashalinaha means those who had more than 1,000 students, they were called the Mahashalinaha. So somewhat like our universities. So that means in those days, there were people who had thousands of students. So which means they also had a number of teachers, probably. So Mahashalinaha, Kulapatayaha, Gurukuladhishtataraha, Babu. So Gurukuladhishtataraha. So that such Guru things were there. Then again, if you see another Gita, I just told you. Then again, Vishnu Purana. Yeah, Vishnu Purana, again, there are examples. Then there is one reference from Vishnu Purana, where Putro Vrutsamadasyapi, Shunako Nama Shaunakaha. There was one Rishi called Shaunaka. His Shunaka, his sons, Shaunakaha, Brahmanaha, Kshatriyashaiva, Vaishyas, Shudras, Tathaivasha. So the same Rishi, there were four categories: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudras, all the four people born to that one particular Rishi called Shunaka. Maybe Rishi, Mr. Shunaka, maybe. So Putro Grutsamadasyapi, Shunako is Shaunaka. So Grutsamada was the grandfather, Shunaka was the father, and Shaunaka, they were the people. Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, all the people, they were there. Then again, Shanti Parva again says, from one Varna called Brahmana, all other Varnas evolved. So that again, Shanti Parva, there is again a repeated mention. In Mahabharata, there is a repeated mention. Then again, Pandavas, we know that in Ekachakrapura, when they escaped from that house which was set on fire by Duryodhana and others, they were in the guise of Brahmanas. They were in the guise of Brahmanas, they were doing Bhikshatana. Because Bhikshatana was the job of a Brahmana. Brahmana was not supposed to earn wealth. Brahmana was supposed to live by Bhikshatana, basically, or rather by collecting grain from the fields. He was not supposed to, make money by any way. So that was the picture. Brahmana Dharma Bhikshatanadhikancha Varnyamanam Mahabharatadav. So these people, they became, they were living by begging, by doing Bhikshatanam from people. Then we come across cases like Shanti Parva, yeah, Prabhu. Yeah, in In Shanti Parva, chapter number 188, again very, very clearly it says, there is absolutely no distinction among the Varnas. Na Visheshosti Varnanam Sarvam Brahmamidam Jagat. The whole universe is Brahman. It is it is a manifestation in that Brahman only. Na Visheshosti Varnanam. All these Varnas, there is no exclusiveness, there is no speciality. Na Visheshaha Asti Varnanam. Brahmana Purva Srushtam Hi Karmabhir Varnitam Gatam. Brahma has created all these people, and by virtue of their karma, they are now called with various names, so and so, Varna, etc., etc. So Brahman, this is chapter number 188 of Shanti Parva. Then we have got one other, Kama Bhoga Priya, I just read. Then again in Anushasana Parva, there is an example where a Chandala becomes a Brahmana. So Chandala, this is an interesting story. You see one Brahmin woman, she got in touch with a Shudra, and then a son was born. And then the son was raised as a Brahmana. He didn't know. And the son, one day he was leading two donkeys. Those days, probably donkey was carrying some goods or something. And there he was beating that younger donkey. There is a mother and a son. So he was beating that younger donkey to move faster. So that younger donkey complains to the mother. So this fellow is beating me. So then that donkey says, "Oh, this fellow he has got his Chandala mind. What can we do?" So this person, he understands the language, and he understands. He asks that Gardabhi. So there is a discussion that Gardabhi, with that Gardabhi, there is a discussion. So there, that Gardava says, not Gardava, Gardabhi says, yes, you were born to so and so this Shudra, so that is how you are. Then again, he does great tapas and very serious tapas again and again and again. Indra comes and then lures him, I will give you this, I will give you this, etc. But then he doesn't agree. And then finally, he becomes a Maharshi. Indra also, he agrees, yes, you are really a tapasvi, I am giving you Brahmanatvam. So, which means, not in a later Janma, but in the present Janma only, this person becomes a Brahmana. So, by tapas, by virtue of tapas, many people have become Brahmanas. That statement is also there in Mahabharata. By virtue of tapas, a person becomes, from a Chandala status, a person becomes a Brahmana. So, this I'll just trace out the shloka also. Karanani Dvijattasya. Okay.
Now, since we've
Anyway,
had
that
1 hour,
that
we can
particular
start
shloka, I am not.
a discussion, sir. Can we at some point soon start Srinivas part of the story, which is questions to you based on what you've said? Because now it's 1 hour, and if it's
The
okay, but
examples
if
are
there
too
are
many.
more things to
Examples
say,
are too many. That's the problem.
no,
I'll complete in 5 minutes if you say.
yes, please, of course, of
If you
course.
permit, I'll complete in 5
Yeah,
minutes.
sure,
Of course,
sure.
there are not many points. I'll skip those points and then complete in 5 minutes. For example, many stories in Puranas. I don't have ready references, but I can cite them. Then, if you see, a general rule regarding our text is that if some text is not in accordance with the vision of the Veda, so that text can be ignored. So vision of the Veda is to find divinity, to see divinity in every being. So that is what Mahabharata repeatedly says, repeatedly everywhere it says. And all our puja structures, it is like that only. In every puja which we do in our temples, that Ekatma Bhavana is very much there, whether you recite Rutram or whether you recite Purusha Suktam or Uttaranaranam, that Ekatma Bhavana is there. But unfortunately, we don't understand it. And then Ekatma Bhavana is not there. Probably in olden days, when people knew the language, they knew it. But then this type of smruti, where there is some harshness. So that sort of thing, which is not in accordance with the present day sensibility, that also we have to see, because the Dharma Shastras, they are not say a one-time thing. Dharma Shastras evolve from time to time. That is again very, very clearly said in our own Dharma Shastras, that Dharma Shastras, they change from period to period. Then again, probably the structure was accepted only because the political power was with with the Kshatriya. And then the money power was with the Vaishya. And the Shudras were also very rich people, because Shudras, if we see their occupations, many people, the people who were dealing in metals, the people who were dealing in oils, many people who were sculptors, painters, and musicians, so many people, they were making very good money. They were much, much richer than Brahmanas. And then probably they also did not grudge the Brahmins. When the Brahmin sort of isolated himself, Brahmins actually, they led themselves into a sort of self-isolation with all these things. They led into isolation. They lived very poor lives. And that is the reason why even the Shudras, they probably didn't have much grudge against these Brahmins. So the structure continued like that. And if you see the village ecosystem in olden days, even in the village, there was a place for Brahmana, because this Brahmana was not a very rich fellow. He was not politically powerful. He was not meddling with anybody. He was actually surviving on the beneficence of all other people, because in the villages, the village, all these other categories, all other kulam, all other the people of all other kulams, they used to feed this Brahmana. So naturally, even if the Brahmana showed some eccentricity by modern standards, I don't, not from the standard of Manu's Smrutis, but from our standard is an eccentricity. Suppose the man, when he touches somebody, he immediately goes and then takes water, cold water bath on his head and all that. Nowadays, we call him an eccentric. So for all these things, they excused, they ignored. So, but then the Brahmana, he had that strict regimen with him. So this is one thing. But now, of course, the Brahmins also have migrated from the villages. And when the Brahmins have totally migrated from villages, they also, their lifestyle also has changed. In the village, they were accountable to the village. They were accountable, and then they were at least saying some good things to villagers. But now, having come to the urban areas, they have become non-entities. They have become nobody. And then in the village, there is a religious vacuum, which is very happily filled up by the pastors and other people. So that is again another point. So with this, I think I can conclude. I can very firmly say that Varna and this Kulam, they are totally different. Varna and caste, if we want to use that word, Varna and caste are totally different. Varna is a personality type, whereas this Kulam is something which is a professional group or a social group following a particular profession with particular job skills. And the caste is certainly not created by Manu or any other Smriti. So that is what we can say. Thank you. Now Srinivas can question.
Thank you,
Yes.
thank you, thank you very much.
Madhuji, would you like to say something before I start my questions?
I just have a small one, which is, and then you take over, which is that length and breadth of the country. Whenever I have interacted with different jatis, kulams, people of different regions in India, if you ask them about their own rituals, culture, practices, whatever, which may appear, say, to me, a North Indian or a Punjabi from North or Delhi base, a little strange. Yeah, the only justification offered in India by people is, well, this is how we do it in our community. They never say, but Manusmriti said that, but Yagnavalkya said that, or Ramayana said that. Nobody ever cites any authority. They only cite the authority of their internal consensus to do things in a certain way. No other. Never have I heard anybody ever cite an authority figure like that. हमारे यहाँ ऐसा ही होता. And then, secondly, nobody assumes the power to tell another jati how to manage their affairs. They take it for granted that every jati, with its own internal jati panchayat, um, or kula panchayat, will do it their way. So, in that sense, most jatis are horizontally placed, they're not vertically placed. That was one of the things. And the customs and rituals, which is why we could host such a diverse variety of customs, rituals, lifestyles, food habits, dress habits, everything. Because nobody ever interfered with someone else. They just managed their own affairs. Now, all yours, Srinivas.
Thank you, Madhuji. Thank you, Aravinda Rao garu. It was a fantastic presentation that you have done, quoting from various sources, which clearly establishes the non-rigidity and liberality of what we call the Hindu civilization and Sanatana Dharma. But of course, it is not as simple as that. There's a lot of questions and complexities, which is leading to a lot of strife even today. And these questions, as you have quoted from Mahabharata, there's extensive discussion about who a real Brahmana is. Even the Buddhists, for example, Asalayana Sutta, they have one thing where a Brahmin supremacist
Padam also. Dharma Padam also.
Buddha.
Brahmana Varga, there is a chapter.
Correct. He debates. So if you see, whether in Buddhist sources or in Hindu sources like Mahabharata, everywhere there's a constant debate about who a real Brahmana is, right? So why would there be so much debate, if there is a great amount of a disagreement, right? Maybe there is somebody who's actually claiming to be a Brahmana who is not a Brahmana, or somebody is actually questioning, somebody's status as a Brahmana, and then answer has to be given. So there is constant strife of some sort, with the categories, who is a Brahmana, especially with Brahmana, right? Not with there is no question of who is a Kshatriya. But of course, there has always been confusion about who a Vaishya is and who a Shudra is. I mean, outwardly, it appears pretty straightforward. But then you see, by the time of Manusmriti itself, right, there were so many occupations which were difficult to be placed, whether to be placed in the Sudra category or whether they should be placed in the Vaishya category. For example, if you see the definition of Sudra and their responsibilities or duties, it says personal service, right, to Brahmanas and the other Varnas, right? That's it, personal service as a servant, personal servant. Whereas agriculture and cattle rearing and trade was, Vanija was put under Vaishya. No, but then there is no mention of all the different kinds of artisans. And, if you see, the majority of the jatis would actually be productive jatis, as Madhu Kishwarji says. But where would they all go? Would they be Vaishya? No, would they be Shudra? The clarity is not there, because if you see any kind of a description of what a Shudra is, it's always described as a personal servant. So what I'm saying is that
I think this word, sorry, Srinivas, the word personal servant is alien. Let's use the exact term that is used in the local languages or in Sanskrit. Because personal servant immediately acquires that demeaning meaning,
Okay.
and only that.
Okay, I mean personal servant, not
You
in the
mean
sense of
service
ownership.
provider? No,
Correct. Service
firstly,
provider.
there's a
Yeah.
difference between service provider, because the entire economy these days is supposed to be vibrant on the basis of India becoming one of the best service providing
No, but
economies
what
in
I would
the
like to
world.
mention, the reason I'm using the word personal is that it's very clear. He is not a service provider to the society. He's a service provider to the individuals or individual families. So, in that sense, I meant a servant, not
No, but
as a
that way,
general service.
Even a
Pardon?
Brahmin, if he provides service, for example, Shrad or marriage, he's providing you a service. But it doesn't become, in that sense, it's a personal service for that family.
Well, I mean, see, what I
Can
see.
I say? Can I say a word?
Sure.
Can I say this distinction between Shudra and Vaishya was not very, very clear. You are right. It was quite fluid. Because, for example, a Lohakara, he makes good amount of money. A Lohakara was not considered a Vaishya in olden days. Maybe in some other region he was called a Vaishya. We do not know. Lohakara, goldsmith, some other people, some other intermediary caste or pulams. So there is some amount of fluidity, because Gita says only
Yeah.
Krushi Gauraksha Vanijyam. And Vanijyam means anything is Vanijyam. For
Yeah.
example, in Mahabharata, there is a story in Anushasana Parva. There is a story between Jajali and some other Tuladhara. He goes to one trader, a small trader, who sells forest produce. Is a person who is selling forest produce, some honey, etc., etc. So he is called a Vaishya there, somebody who is just selling forest produce. And then he was
Right.
called a
No,
Tuladhara,
but
and then a
see,
Brahmana goes
my
to
my
Tuladhara
point, sir, is
to
to
learn
point
Dharma
out
from him. Yeah.
that
Regarding the strife, regarding the strife which you said,
yeah.
I personally felt after reading these Smritis, it was more to put some amount of drill in the mind of the Brahmana. The Brahmana is repeatedly warned, you are not supposed to do this, you are not supposed to do this, you are not supposed to earn any money, and not
So
even for tomorrow's food.
what I'm trying to point out, sir, is that maybe the categories of the Chaturvarnya categories of Brahmana, Rajanya, Vaishya, Sudra, in the days of Rig Veda, when the 10th mandala, when it was mentioned, the society was a simple society, and probably it was very clear and there was no confusion as such. But by the time the society, we are talking about the Buddhist time, or even later times when supposedly the Smritis were compiled, there's significant amount of confusion. And first of all, the confusion is arising not only in terms of a definition of these terms alone, right, and their applicability to the professions in the society, but in addition, the so-called Varna Shankara, that we're talking about, and the demand, on part of the Smritis to maintain some sort of an endogamous, endogamy within the Varna, which itself again was not happening. So, like I was mentioning earlier, Yajnavalkya Smriti also talks about jatis, so the anuloma, pratiloma outcomes, right? Out of the wedding, mixing of
Yeah.
these two varnas, they
Inter
call them
Varna.
jatis. In the Sakshi, I think Adhikarana or something, it is called as a jati. So already Yajnavalkya Smriti is trying to define what a jati is, and it comes pretty close. And also, if you see the dating of Yajnavalkya Smriti compilation, and yesterday Conrad Els talked about the genetics research, talking about when endogamy has started. Of course, Madhuji denounced any kind of a validity, acceptance of validity of this kind of studies, but it matches with the proliferation of anuloma pratiloma mixing, mixed varnas or varna sankara, with the starting of endogamous nature, of jatis, according to the genetics research. So, but what I'm trying to say here is that as a concept, this Chatur Varnyam, which is the four categories, probably have been a failure for majority of the time of our civilization that we know. In the last 3,000 years, probably, it's been a failure, right? So the subject of the recent discussion with the Madhu ji had with one of the traditional scholars was the relevance of tradition and these traditional smritis and other texts in modern times, right? So one thing that we will be forced to say outrightly is that these categories that we're talking about, there are two kinds of, one is a social, these categories are clearly social categories. They're basically groupings, within the society. But then these categories proliferate into every aspect of the society, as seen from the Smritis, right? The categories are used from access to the texts. Like, for example, Sudra Varna is not allowed to even hear mantras, and their samskaras cannot be based on any of the mantras, and they cannot learn Veda, whereas for Dvijas, it is allowed. So it has infiltrated into the spiritual domain, because access to a text, which is the primary source, the very fountainhead of the very civilization and the religion, as we say, itself is being denied to the majority of the population. I mean, because we are also talking about it being denied to the women, all women. Forget about not just the Shudra women, but also the Dvija women. So more than 90% of the society is actually being denied, right? And majority of it is being denied based on a varna, right? So it has infiltrated.
I'll clarify this. I'll clarify on this point of one point of majority on this.
I'd like to
I
finish
think,
this.
Maybe
And then,
yeah,
I'd like to
you
finish.
finish and
Carry
then
on.
we.
So, and then, for example, you see in the Vyavahara Pada, Vyavahara Adhyayas of the Smritis, if you study, where they're describing the judicial procedures, I mean, this concept has inflated to such an extent that even sakshis, the witnesses, will have to get from the same varna or same jati, right? And it's throughout. Even if you see what kind of a punishments are being prescribed by the smritis, the complete law and the legal implementation of the law is based on who is who, right? If it's a brahmana, the punishment is very minor. If it is a sudra, it's a very harsh punishment. So completely the whole society is being organized, the judicial processes, the spiritual domain, everything is infiltrated by these categories, which by themselves are not really clear. I mean, other than the kshatriya and the brahmana varnas, there's absolutely not much of a clarity at all. I still have more points to make now.
Point by point, can we answer? Otherwise, I may
No,
forget
I
it.
think we'll get too
Okay.
many. And before you start, Aravinda
Sure.
ji, I want to clarify just a couple of points. Srinivas, when I yesterday took on our friend Conrad over genetic studies, what I said very specifically is this: I don't trust the West
Yeah,
and the intent behind the genetic studies
I'm
that the
with you.
West carries on, because they have justified racism,
Oh yeah,
they've justified the most hideous things, and the intention itself is to put down others,
yeah.
never to actually study. So I actually don't
No,
trust
I,
Western.
I agree with you, Madhuji. I
Number
think
one is
any
that.
kind of
Now
any
that
kind of
there are, yeah,
yeah,
that's one. Secondly, the other point very quickly, because I have smaller points. Secondly, you talked about personal servant, and I think we need to keep in mind. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Arvinda ji. The whole concept of yajmani relations. Everybody was somebody else's yajman, and therefore everyone provided personal service to someone or the other. The lohar provided to the kisan of course provided nurturance to everybody else, and the largest number of yajmans were dependent on the farmer. But everybody including the brahmins, kisi na kisi ke yajman, including the humble nut community who went from village to village, displaying their traditional art forms or whatever else. The point that I'm making is that the moment we use English, crude equivalents in the English language, we go haywire. And finally, one small point. Arvindaji, you talked about Brahmins were not supposed to earn their living; they were just supposed to do cerebral, intellectual work. And now this is something that has become an attack point. But let's not forget, the Jewish community has its equivalent in the rabbis, who also not supposed to actually soil their hands, not supposed to do any physical work or trade or whatever. But the entire community felt honored, has always felt honored to have, for example, a rabbi for a son in law, who the rich family or whichever family marries that person to his daughter is only too happy to support him, just pursuit of knowledge. And look at where the Jews have reached, because they continued with pursuit of knowledge and allowing specialized groups to do that, whereas we have demeaned our Brahmins. Today the one group that is most reluctant to learn Sanskrit are Brahmins. I have set up a scholarship fund for poor Brahmin families if they wish to educate their children in Sanskrit. And I'm finding they say, oh no, madam, क्या बात कर रही हैं आप? क्या बात करनी है? भूखे मरना है हमारे बच्चों को. बड़ी मुश्किल से तो उससे पीछा छूटा है. Nobody is willing to take my scholarship for poor Brahmin families. So now all yours.
no, I mean, I do agree that in a lot of these families, there's eagerness to take up other professions. Like for example, Aravinda Rao mentioned that Purohitas are finding it difficult to find wives, and that is
Yes.
a phenomenon everywhere in the country. So that's a common thing. But at the same time, we're also seeing growing interest within the society across, in the broad-based fashion, a growing interest in the past, right? And the very reason, if you consider why you had this call with Maitreyi Goswami, and where you were talking about the relevance. See, the reason we are talking about the relevance is that there is a growing interest in the tradition. There is a growing interest in the texts of the past. And we all very strongly believe that they have something to teach us even today. Otherwise, we would simply leave the texts as they are and move on, but we don't want to, because we very strongly feel that there is still something that we can learn from this text, whether it is Mahabharata or Ramayana, which continue to guide everybody in the civilization, but also texts like the Dharmasutras or Dharmashastras and some of the other texts, right? So that is the reason why we are talking about the relevance and relevance. The relevance of the word relevance has become quite a bit in recent times. See, but there is a concomitant problem we are also noticing, and that was very clearly brought out in your interview with Maitreyi Goswamiji, which is any kind of a questioning of a traditional scholar is being seen by some of these people who have taken greater interest in their past, is being seen as some sort of an insult, right? They have raised this notion of the tradition to such a high level in their minds. They keep repeating the word Shraddha, Shraddha, Shraddha so much that they have converted even human. For example, if you see the Dharma Shastras, it is not God-given laws. There is a human who has actually compiled from the customs which are being followed by humans, right? So there's nothing infallible about
this. Yeah.
Yes,
I started with that point.
Correct. There's nothing infallible about this text, but then the new group, what I call the neo-orthodoxy, they take affront. They're insulted by any questioning of any text from the past. Right, if we make up some random Sanskrit name and call it a text and criticize it, probably they would jump and troll you, without actually trying to find out whether there's actually a text like that or not. That is the situation that we are seeing, right? And this is not simply a social media phenomenon.
Can I comment?
Yes, sir.
Any more points? Yeah.
No, I have. So let me finish my point. So this is not just a social media phenomenon, because what is happening on the social media is actually moving on into the real world as well. Like, for example, I will give you one example. I mean, recently at a cultural organization in Hyderabad called Saptaparni, there was an event conducted, by the name Texts and Traditions, right? And all the speakers who were invited to speak there were actually youngsters, who are basically in other professions and taking interest in our texts and in the past and the history and all of this, right? So you see, the one of the speakers, who was the biggest troll for Madhuji, and then who was bashing her and posting really strong statements against Madhuji for just interviewing a traditional scholar. So he was a speaker there, and his claim to fame is actually just having studied, actually not even completed his study of Vishnu Sahasranama, right? So, and in that event, if you see, there was hardly any space for people to sit. There were like almost 150 chairs. The hall was full. It was overflowing. Many people had to return. So, and this is happening everywhere. There's a great, you see Indic Academy is conducting a lot of courses, and there's great amount of interest in these courses, from Indic Academy, and this is happening all over. So there's a large group of people, and this is not happening only from the Brahmin community, but from across the board within the Hindu society. Now, as there is prosperity, as they have more time to spend about thinking about their past, their identity, they want to dig into the past. They want to understand where they have come from. They want to, when they go to a temple, they would like to understand why is the temple built that way. When they see the sculpture work on the temple walls, they would like to understand what are the references. Where is it from in Mahabharata? This is being said. And when they go to Mahabharata, where it says this is a Panchama Veda, they would like to understand what are Vedas, right? And they would like to understand what are Dharma Shastras. And with the internet becoming all pervasive, and websites like Wisdom Lib or Sacred Books of the East or archive.org, every text is immediately available on click. You just type something and it's available. And forget about talking about the OpenAI's chatbot, where voice enabled questioning also gives you whatever you want. It's so there is actually no need for learning all this by heart and repeating, which actually many scholars, traditional scholars, have been reduced to. There is no need for that. See, but the thing is that there is ease of access to all these texts, right? And the people who are investigating their past would like to understand, and who are being bombarded, with all kinds of arguments from the leftists, from the Muslims, the Christians. They'd like to understand the truth in those arguments, right? And they would definitely verify all these arguments on their own. And whatever arguments that we are providing, we better be right. No, we have to be sure that whatever responses we are providing are comprehensive in nature. For example, in today's talk, I mean, so in a sense, we have to play devil's advocate, among ourselves as well, while at the same time we have to try to understand what is happening with the neo-orthodoxy, right? Forget about the neo-orthodoxy. Let's talk about the devil's advocate part of it for now, right? Because the neo-orthodoxy is actually using those aspects and those texts which, sir, you said are irrelevant. They're focusing and zeroing on these texts, right? And they're declaring very proudly, they use the word adhikara all the time, very proudly, because of course, they have this very strong sense of identity. Like, for example, within the Brahmin community, and they have a pride, of their jati or a varna. Of course, they should have. There's nothing wrong with it. But then when they come across these texts, which are in fact written from the perspective of a Brahmin supremacism, they quietly are in fact advocating what is in these texts. For example, one of the most common things that you would find in the neo-orthodoxy is their denigration of the word equality, right? The moment you say equality, fraternity, and freedom or whatever, they laugh. Say, hey, you're talking about all these words like equality, you are outdated. You cannot really talk about equality in every sense. And they use a strawman argument. Like, for example, many people, like, for example, even within the RSS, have used the word equality when they talked about, a women's, menstruating woman's access to the Sabarmala temple, right? So that, of course, I mean, was reasoned out, and eventually the RSS also has accepted the arguments that were given by the traditional, pundits. But what I'm saying is that this word equality, the denigration of the word equality, is not in a specific context, but it is universal. So, like, for example, if I talk about, a Dharma Shastra, seeing Shudras as a community which has a lower worth than Vaishyas, and the Vaishyas having lower worth than Kshatriyas, and likewise up to the Brahmanas. And the prescription of punishments is graded according to their relative worth, right? They don't find anything problematic with that. And is that something, that vision?
Srinivas, 1 minute.
Can I answer? Can I answer?
I
So
would
I'll first
also like to
let
come
me,
in. Just 1
Madhuji,
second.
let me.
Yeah. Just give me a minute. I think, Srinivasji, firstly, it's not just traditionalists who will mock words like equality, fraternity, liberty, whatever. Because these are mythical qualities as far as the practice of the West is concerned. Tell me one country in the West which actually practices equality. Even today, it's a facade. It's a very colorful, very seductive facade. But
And
in
what is our
actual
ideal?
fact,
What is our
no,
ideal?
no, 1 second.
Let me.
Yeah, to me, Vedanta provides me a better ground for believing in the equal or same worth of all the humblest of beings than does the French slogans of equality, fraternity, liberty.
So I understand what you're
One
saying, but
second.
would you support the Dharma Shastras?
No. I'm not supporting Dharma
Let
Shastras
me.
or opposing Dharma Shastras. All I'm saying is their pretenses are so gross. They're still racist. Their actions have been so gross and continue to be so. And yet they dare preach to us. So I don't fall in the trap of their democracy, equality, blah, blah, blah. Please show me how you practice. I go by your practice. The point that I'm
Let
trying
me.
to, yeah, no, you will come in a second, sir. All right, let me allow you to answer him because you will have more solid answers. Yeah.
Okay, most important point we have to remember is that The Abrahamic religions, they stand on a very, very weak footing, in the sense that they don't have a doctrine. Hinduism is we call it a dharma, or whether you call it a religion or a dharma. It is standing on the on a philosophical basis of the Upanishads. And the Upanishads, the people who envisioned, or rather who had vision of the Upanishads, they did not have any agenda to start a religion. There was absolutely no agenda to start a religion. Upanishads, it is a pure inquiry into the nature of reality. And we don't define God as somebody who is sitting in heaven and somebody who is opposed to him staying in hell. And however powerful the God may be, God again is a very limited person. When you say that God is there in heaven, God is not here, and God has an enemy, then how is it different from you and me? And you have that is a belief system. The Abrahamic religions, they are totally dependent on a belief system. It is based on the so-called revelation to one particular person. It is not an evolution. It is something. It is not something by you see. If you see our Vedas, there is not one single rishi. There are hundreds of rishis. Hundreds of rishis have contemplated in several places on earth, not on earth, in the Bharatavarsha. And then there was some sort of consensus among them. Like we have these meetings now, they also used to have meetings in the king's courts, and then they used to debate, and then there is a debate. In Abrahamic religions, there is absolutely no debate. There is no debate. It is purely a belief system. Whereas here there is a debate. There is a debate, and then we are bothered about what is the nature of truth. So that is why we define the supreme reality as not a person. We call it an impersonal entity called Brahma.
Sir, but
And what is
Aravinda Rao
Brahma?
garu,
And that
see,
Brahma
one
is
thing,
what is called Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. 1 minute, let me complete. And when we say that Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma in modern English, it means infinitely existing consciousness. So that is how we have defined the supreme reality. And when the supreme reality is like that, whatever form you want to have, whatever name you want to have, because the common man, if you say that to the common man, if you say, okay, there is whatever God you are worshipping is not real, you are worshipping so and so Hanuman, or you are worshipping Shakti, you are worshipping Vishnu, you are worshipping Shiva. That is not the final thing. The final thing is one impersonal entity. The common man will not be able to appreciate. So, in order to allow all these traditions, in fact, we allowed all the traditions. So that is the point we have to see. Gita also says, "Yo yo yam yam tanum bhaktah shraddhaya architum ichchati tasya tasya achalam shraddham tameva vidathami," it says. So that means whoever in whatever form wants to worship, we allow all that. So that is the reason why Shankaracharya, he harmonized various traditions. He was called Shanmatasthapanacharya. So he harmonized various traditions. So our people, they were always, their idea was to harmonize, to
but he
include.
also upheld the
This
Dharma
inclusion,
Shastras. He
1 minute, let me
specifically
complete.
upheld the Dharma
Because
Shastras.
they can only know Abrahamic religions can only blame us on Dharma Shastras because they don't have solid religion. Their religion is totally on a shaky ground. Whereas our religion, you said, you see, the Hindu religion, it survived for such a long time. It is a surprise, something like that. It survived because of the strength, because of the inclusiveness. It said everybody. If you see divinity in everybody, you have to see divinity even in a small animal also. So when that was the structure, Sunijaiva, Swabhakecha, etc. So all this, it was there. It was a counterbalance to whatever points were there in the Dharma Shastras. And Dharma Shastras, you and I know that they were never followed. In fact, as an educated person, even the
Sir,
very
I
orthodox
disagree.
people, you don't
I
trust.
disagree there, sir. See, the one of the common
1 minute, let
arguments
me
that is
complete. Let me
provided
complete.
by,
Let me complete. Let me complete. Let me complete. The Abrahamic, you brought in the Abrahamic religions and the criticism of the Abrahamic religions. They are doing it only because they have got an imperialist approach. They have got an imperialist agenda, whereas we don't have an imperialist agenda. Upanishads, they do not have an imperialist agenda. Their agenda is only to know truth. Whereas the other people, they have an imperialist agenda. They want to demolish this. If they want to demolish, their religion is not enough. They can only pick up some text like Manusmriti or Parashara Smriti or something like Apastamba Sutra, and then they can only say, oh, there is so much of discrimination, etc. And if discrimination were to be real, the society would not have existed for such a long time. Because, as I said, Brahmins, they were not like today's Brahmins. Today's Brahmins are reasonably rich. They have come out of their home turf. They have come out of
No, most
their profession,
Brahmins are
and then
very poor,
they
at
are
least
now
in
making
North
money.
India,
But the
sir.
Brahmins were absolutely poor. So, in
sir,
fact,
I
from that,
understand. No, I
by
get your
being
point, sir.
poor,
I get your point. But see, the main point that I'm trying to make here is you cannot brush away the whole
I have not
genre of
completed. I have not
text.
completed. I have not
Sir,
completed. You see, I have
no.
not completed. You see,
Sir, but you're
you
continuing
were
in the
also.
same
You
point.
were
Let
also.
me.
You were also. Okay, please
Yeah.
carry on.
No, no. So, no, I understand what you're saying, sir. The fountainhead of Sanatana Dharma being the Upanishads, yes, that's very clear. But you can't ignore what has come afterwards, right? You can't simply brush away the whole genre of Dharma Shastra and Dharma Sutra texts, right? And from whether you take all the known Dharma Sutras, every one of the Dharma Sutras, whether it's Apastamba or Vashishta or Baudhayana or Gautama, any one of those texts, you take any one of the very well referenced Dharma Shastras, whether it's Katyayana, Brihaspati, Narada, Yajnavalkya, Manusmriti, any one of these, right? They're all united in grading the society and assigning punishments, assigning any sort of a relative worth based on the Varna. Shudra deserves the harshest punishment. Brahmana deserves the least punishment, and this has been there. So I don't know. No, let's not get into the dating and all that. But even if, let's say, the sutras were from 600 BCE onwards, and the Dharma Shastras probably up to 600 AD, for the texts for more than 1,000 years, there is this common theme. One. Second, the same, the Bhashyas, the Bhashyakaras who have come on the Dharma Shastras, right? Starting probably from 6th century onwards, all the way up to 18th century, and the Nibandhas and all kinds of commentaries that we see, do not oppose that. They're only providing a greater clarity, on these aspects, right? So this is a truth that it's a fact that we have to accept. This is there in. So we may definitely agree that yes, in Manusmriti it's probably the harshest, and probably Yajnavalkya Smriti is somewhat liberal. But yes, the both more or less united. Now, the thing, what I would like to point out, here, is that you cannot brush aside this whole genre of texts, because if you see the number of authors and the number of texts that were written in this category, from the P.V. Kane's History of Dharma Shastras, he himself lists in the index 6,000 texts, and he lists 4,000 authors, starting from in the last approximately 2,000 years or so, right? How can you simply brush aside all these texts and they're all
No,
saying
but
the same thing,
Srinivas,
right? So,
I think
but
one
just one
second.
second,
Can
man.
you
So
Yeah.
yes, Dr. Nagaraj Pathuriji talked about the ground reality. You're talking about not following these things. Of course, not following is again based on customs and all of that, and it's not specifically not following Manusmriti, but maybe they're following something else. But it's not like you go somebody on the road and ask, do you know Manusmriti? He'll say, maybe I don't know. But the thing is that whatever is being said in Manusmriti, if you can see it's being quoted in Mahabharata. So Manusmriti influences the sutas, and the people who are writing the itihasas, the people who are going
No,
out
no,
into
no.
the
You have not
society,
read.
Let
No,
me
no.
they
quote
Manusmriti
from
is
influence
not.
the rest of the society.
Srinivas,
So this
I
is
have a
not.
quote
Mahabharata
from
is diametrically
Manusmriti.
opposite to Manusmriti.
I
Mahabharata,
have a
in fact, that is what.
quote from
Sir, no,
Manusmriti.
the neo-orthodoxy has already
No, no, no.
started
I'm
this
not.
debate.
No, no, no.
No, no. What they're
Let me
saying is
complete.
that you cannot. No, what they say is that Mahabharata is cannot. Those people who place Mahabharata in opposition to Dharma Shastras, they say the neo-orthodoxy. They say neither do you know Mahabharata nor do you know the Dharma Shastra. So, for example, if when Madhuji asked Maitreya Goswamiji, what do you make of a rickshaw puller Brahmana? What do you make of a BD selling Brahmana? She says, oh, they've become Kulabhrashta. Of course, setting aside Apadharma and all that, Kulabhrashta. So, and she also gives an explanation saying, oh, in Kali Yuga, all kinds of things could happen. The thing is that, what do they mean? What do the neo-orthodoxy mean? So, even the traditional
You cannot.
orthodoxy, what
No,
do
no.
they mean by...
Can I?
No, let me complete this
I
point. So,
have
what
not
do
heard
they
about. I
mean
have
by
not heard
in
about.
Kali Yuga, everything happens? So what they mean is that, well, maybe generations ago, maybe 3,000 years ago, something has been put together, right, by the thought leaders of those times. They could be called rishis, whatever you may call them. Now we are only degrading, and we're unable to catch up with the ideal. So what they mean by today's Kali Yuga is that the ideal has been written down 3,000 years ago. We have to follow that ideal, and it still stays intact today as an ideal. And the fact that
Who said it? Did I
no,
did I
I'm
say
saying
that?
those people who are
Arvinda
No,
ji,
no.
saying
Did
yes,
I
that
say?
this is Kali
No,
Yuga.
did I
hold
say
it
that?
for a
No, no. I
minute.
have
No,
not.
you're
I
not,
have
sir.
not
Srinivas
You're
ji,
spoken
not.
that.
hold it.
No,
Please
you're
hold
not,
it
sir.
for a minute. Please
Sure,
hold it
sure.
for a
Did I?
minute.
Did I say that?
No,
You did
Arvind
not,
ji,
sir.
Where?
You did not.
let me answer this. I think what's happening is, which actually is in a way my fault as a host. He's arguing with Maitri Goswami. He's not arguing with you. Number one. Now the point is, Maitri doesn't want to answer those questions. The reason I started this series is because I felt that she didn't want to, in the way that Arvind ji is answering each question and telling you what the real content of these and the multiplicity of approaches you can take and the multiplicity of texts. Now, for example, you, Srinivas, quoted Apastamba. I just have a quote from him. He says, no, the Manusmriti, he stresses that the business of the ruler is not to impose laws from above, but that a king must inquire into the law of
You're right.
jatis, of districts, of guilds, shrenis, of kulas, and settle the peculiar law of each. Thus have the holy sages, well knowing that law is grounded on immemorial custom, embraced as the root of all piety, good usages long established.
Even Apastamba says it in the
Yes,
conclusion.
exactly. Here it
Yeah,
is. Some declare, I'm just one quote. It
yeah.
just came on my phone per chance. Some declare that the remaining duties, which have not been taught here, must be learned from women
Correct.
and men of all castes.
Correct. That's
The
Apastamba. Yeah.
knowledge which women possess is the completion of all study. That's
Correct. Correct.
Apastamba. Now,
Correct.
there hundreds of such quotes.
No,
Why
no.
the
See,
hell do we have to take what they think is the weakest link in the chain? I mean, and there's thousands of wonderful things said by each one
but
of
you
these.
can't brush aside this. You cannot
No,
brush
no,
aside
no,
what
no,
is
no. I'm
a
not
fact.
brushing aside. I'm saying, did society
There
follow?
has to be an explanation for it.
I'm saying that if there was a system whereby if you did not follow Manu, and he says custom is the final authority, and each kula has the right to change its custom,
No,
and
no.
they do
Every
not
Dharma
go on
Shastra itself
punishing.
mentions
Yes,
Sadachara as one of the sources of Dharma.
there you are. So what's
Yes,
our
it
problem?
does.
You
Correct.
ignore the rest. If there is something that doesn't meet with your approval, say hell with it. I'm not bound to listen to it. Nobody is going to say Sartan se juda because you did not listen to those 3 lines of Manu. But there are thousand others that I need to cling on to because they
But I'm
have
saying just quoting the good side, uh, we cannot continue doing that because the others will quote the bad side. So we have to
no,
have,
but
as
I'm saying
Hindus,
all
as
we
an
tell them is
Let
ignore
explanation,
me.
it. We
an
ignore it, you
explanation.
ignore it. You can't ignore your text. We can ignore our text where we don't like them. Now,
No,
Aravinda Rao.
No, no. All
let
I'm
me also
saying
add
is that
something.
there is Brahmin or what they Brahminical or Brahmin supremacism. It has always been there, and it will be there, and it is there today as well. We have to simply recognize that. The moment we recognize that, the job becomes easier for us. The moment we recognize that, the next thing we do is that how do you identify Brahminical supremacism? What are the markers?
Where is Brahmin supremacy? I mean, who's paying attention to them? You count these few hundred
No, no,
people.
they are influencing the current generation in a very big way. They're influencing the current generation of Brahmin youngsters in a very big way, and this is not something to be taken lightly. And you have seen, I mean, the number
So
of comments
one point.
against
Can I make?
Maitroyi Goswami video, all the youngsters, on the YouTube video, 200, 300 comments. Where is that
Only,
coming from?
only. And millions, crores of Brahmins who are not listening either to Maitreya
No,
Goswami
no,
or
no.
to
But
Madhu
see,
Kishwar.
ma'am,
Oh,
but
they, I mean,
I talked about the event in Hyderabad. So the thing is that this is a growing phenomenon. This is really gaining in strength, right? And they are becoming very vocal. We cannot ignore it. We have to recognize it. We have to identify it. We
I
have to
know, but they're
have an
frogs in a
explanation
well.
for it.
They're frogs in a
If
well.
no, let me. Can I answer?
Yes, please,
Yes, sir.
Aravinda.
Yes,
Can
sir.
I answer, please?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I have not seen any neo-orthodoxy. If there are any such videos, you kindly send them to me. So
Okay.
if what you say is right, neo-orthodoxy is there among the Brahmin youth, it is really
Yeah.
detrimental. It is detrimental to Brahmins. In fact,
Yes.
Brahmins, by their own self-isolation, say now, in olden days, they were very poor. Now they are making money. That's a different thing.
Sir,
And one
NRIs
point
who
which
are
is,
NRI
one minute,
Brahmins
let
who
me
are sure.
let me clarify. Let me clarify. You were saying
Okay.
that we can't brush aside all these
Yeah.
books.
6,000 texts,
We are
4,000
not
authors.
brushing aside. In fact, we are not brushing aside. That is the reason why I quoted. In fact, there are so many other things which I can quote. There are several positive things and several negative things also. There are very many positive things, and some negative things are also there. So it is not as though a basket of which is liked by only one group. And in fact, if a Brahmana reads, a traditional Brahmana reads, today when a neo-orthodox Brahmana reads, all these neo-orthodox young boys, they are actually totally ignorant about what is there in these texts. So these neo-orthodox people, if they really know what is there in their books, their ego will come down. Their
Yeah.
ego will come down. Array, you are not a Brahmana. It is not as though you were born from Brahma's mouth.
Sir,
It
I'll
is,
ask you two
you
very
see,
straight
Parashuram.
questions, sir.
One minute,
Very straight questions.
one minute. It is,
Yeah.
you see, Parashurama created some Brahmins. Then if you see a book called Brahmanotpatti Martanda, he says Parashurama created some Brahmins. He went to some place and then he did not find Brahmins. He called some people. They happened to be fishermen. So he made them Brahmins. Lord Rama also seems to have created some Brahmanas. Sage Agastya seems to have created some Brahmanas. So there is a book called Brahmanotpatti Martanda. Kindly look into that.
No, sir,
So
I agree
if
with
our
you completely, sir.
one
I
minute,
am
let
on
me
your
complete.
side. No. Okay.
Look, let me complete. Let me complete.
Okay.
You said that
Okay.
90% of the people were excluded. It is totally wrong. I don't agree with that on that point only, because 90% of the people now, because many people who are Kshatriyas, many people who are Brahmanas, they have become Sudras. Because of so many invasions and all that, many people gave up their genius. They gave
Okay.
up their sacred thread and they called themselves Brahmana,
Okay.
Sudras. So
Okay.
that
I
again,
agree.
our own books say. So
Sir, but
many people,
very,
they
very
became
simple
Sudras.
question, sir. Very simple question. How can we talk about a Hindu Renaissance when a large section of the Hindu society is prevented? When women are talking about, there was a huge debate, on the internet and Twitter, and some of the internet magazines, have also talked about it. The portals have talked about it. When women are talking about learning mantras, right, and doing Sandhya Vandana, there's a huge backlash. How can women do it? Because they do not have the adhikara, for it. So why does Hindu
Those, yeah, you
society
see, those
still
who are
have
saying,
this?
those who are
What is
saying
the
that
reason?
they're
What is the
no,
reason why?
those who are talking like that, they are really ignorant. We have to, I consider them ignorant
Tell me,
because, in fact, I
was
also
there,
answer to them
Sir, but
because
would you
somebody
say the
said
Sringeri
tell
Vatha
me,
is
today,
ignorant?
Srinivas,
Would you consider
when
the
no,
Buddhist
no,
when a
today
tradition
only,
as
Dalit
ignorant?
woman was made a Mahamandaleshwar, did you see any protest? No, I didn't.
Ma'am, but I'm talking
It,
about the
no,
mathas, the
wait a minute.
Peethadhipatis.
I'm saying a
I
Mahamandaleshwar
was,
anointed a
in fact,
Dalit woman.
I did not complete my talk. It's, in fact, my last point was Dharma
Hmm.
Shastras, they always undergo change. Dharma Shastra is not something which is a fixed one. It always
Yeah,
undergoes change,
right,
and we need a
right.
new Dharma Shastra. We definitely need a new Dharma Shastra, and the
So
initiative
Vyavahara, though
has to
it's
come
over.
from.
It's Vyavahara,
No,
the
no,
government already has. Just for the Achara and
Vyavahara is over.
Prayaschitta.
Vyavahara is over. Only that Achara and Prayaschitta, only
Achara and
these things are
Prayaschitta.
there.
Hmm.
Yeah, in my view, there is no need even for that Chaturvarni Vyavastha. There is no need because even at the time of Vyasa himself said there is so much of Varna Sankara,
Yeah,
Dushparikshayati Mevatihi, he said. When Vyasa himself said, and when it has now become almost irrelevant, what is relevant now is Brahmins as a social group. Brahmins means those who are doing Archaka profession. They may be needed because the religious services are
of
needed for
course,
a society. Like a
of
priest is
course.
needed in Christianity or somebody else is Maulavi is needed in, say, Islam. So a
Hmm.
Brahmana is needed in Hindu society. Otherwise, the religion itself will collapse. If you
Yeah.
want that, if you want that Brahmins have to give up totally, then you are destroying Hinduism.
No,
So
I'm not
Brahmins
saying
will
that.
always be there.
Hmm.
No, Brahmins will always be there. But
Correct.
then
I
let the
agree.
Brahmins be really good. Let the Brahmins be real good Brahmins. Like Shinmayananda said, let us convert Hindus into Hindus. I also say, let us convert Brahmins into Brahmins. Let the
No,
fellows
I
read.
completely agree, sir. Because see, there are great things about Dharma Shastras. The vratas they talk about, the samskaras that they talk about. The even the Puranas, for example, the kshetras they talk about, the kshetra mahatmyas, they talk about. This is all very good. But how many Hindus are actually following? How many Hindus know how to conduct all the samskaras? Right? How many Hindus know any mantras? How many Hindus are
Even the
actually.
Brahmins do not know. The point is, even the Brahmins do not know. They know a few things, and then they are somehow running the show. Because I always say, let the Brahmins at least know them properly.
No, I completely
And
agree that there
this
has to be a Dharma Shastra
so
which talks about for Hindus as a whole. The Achara, Vyavahara part, of course, it's already out of hand for now. But
one more point about equality. I always felt after reading Gita and Upanishads that this idea of equality has gone from India to West. Because in the West there was no idea of equality till about 18th century. In 18th century there was what was called 18th century Enlightenment of the West. Like the 16th century Renaissance, there is the 18th century Enlightenment of the West. And how did this Enlightenment come about? Enlightenment came only after their interaction with the Sanskrit texts. And if you read all these old Indologists, all the old Indologists, they were very, I mean, they were praising Hindu texts like anything. And probably they got frightened. They got frightened that hey, our religion is actually getting knocked out. So then again, probably the church and other forces have come into picture. And then again, the later Indologists, they started, say, finding fault with the things like all these things. So these ideas of equality, etc., they are actually from the Upanishads. Man is born free, and but everywhere is bound in chains. That word of Rousseau is actually that words of Rousseau straight away from the Upanishads. And equality is something which is from the Gita only. The liberalism is from us. You worship, you follow any tradition. All the traditions are allowed. And you see, no other religion allows so many traditions. Everything is allowed. Idol worship is allowed, and then if you want to worship Shiva, it is allowed. You want to worship Vishnu, it is allowed. All the traditions are allowed. So this what more equality do we want? So all these things have compensated, in my view, for whatever whatever silly things which are written
but we
in
have
the
to
Dharma
keep
Shastra.
but we have to keep the Brahmin supremacism in our view, because that has
It
a
is not
potential.
supremacy. It is
I
not
don't
supremacy. It is
understand
another
where
profession.
Well,
he's
That's all.
okay,
It is
let's
coming
not
call it.
from.
supremacy.
No, I'm not talking about
Do you call
supremacy of the all Brahmins as a caste. I'm talking
no
about
do you
Brahmin
call a pastor
supremacist attitudes.
supremacy or a rabbi
Okay,
supremacy
so
or
let
Mauli
me
supremacy?
sir, let me rephrase it. Let's say we have to keep in our view the Brahmin supremacist attitudes in some of the Brahmins,
It's so
which are
No, do
irrelevant
you
still
find
present,
now.
which are
Srinivas,
no
they
no
are
do you find
irrelevant.
which
do you
are a
find
danger,
Mauli?
to the Hindu society. We have to keep them in view, and we have to remember. I mean, for example, and what I'm also saying is that when we are putting forward arguments, stressing on Mahabharata and stressing on Upanishads, and de-stressing, the Smritis or whatever, there has to be a very clear explanation as to why for 2000 years this you know learning has flourished so much, right? And what is it that our texts have been debating for thousands of years? And even Purusha Sukta, for example, everybody talks about how the relative worth of the human body was never there, but Manusmriti itself reinterprets Purusha Sukta and says everything below the navel is less pure, right? Nobody talks about it. So,
Srinivas,
so,
see,
so
I
wha- wha-
think
That is
I
why
think
that is
you
why
are
I said that
very.
is the reason I said that is the reason why Professor Madhuji was saying that how much of Manusmriti is original and how much is interpolated, we do not know. That
Sir,
is
I
number
mean,
one.
that I want to
Number
put a
two,
point, sir.
I'm
1 minute.
saying,
Let
Srinivas,
me say.
sorry, please finish. And I want to have 2 minutes after
Sure.
that, and then we'll wind up. Yeah.
Now, on the
Yeah, what I wanted
interpolations
to say,
part, so
I was saying
one
that
point I would like to make on
whatever
the
is not,
interpolations.
no,
One
no,
point I'd like to make
whatever,
on the interpolations. Sir,
okay,
because, madam, there are so many commentaries. I mean, there are 9 commentaries on Manusmriti, and there are so many more
I
secondary
told that
and
also, all the people, they
tertiary
have accepted one
texts.
text.
right? They're tertiary texts, right? So, and even the other smritis, like Yajnavalkya Smriti makes reference to Manusmriti, and specifically Narada Smriti more or less is a huge repetition of Manusmriti in most of the cases, but it's only a Vyavahara Pada, and nothing else. So it's very difficult to claim, and I know Professor C.K. Raju has also recently on Twitter made a claim like this, but it's very difficult to substantiate unless you have actually done the text criticism study, and then specifically you are able to point out that every commentary and every secondary and tertiary text that we are seeing today are going off based on they have been interpolated and all of that. It's very difficult to prove that we are working with the wrong kind of a text. The second more important thing, sir, one
we
point,
need to stop
point.
this.
Second more
started
important
saying.
point I'd like to
I
make
think
is,
we are going in
if
circles, Srinivas.
no. One point. Even if you are talking about interpolations, for example, everybody talks
No,
about.
I'm not talking of interpolations. I'm
No. I
saying
mean, so even if we speak about Mahabharata, even if we speak about Ramayana, when we speak about interpolations which introduce the supremacist attitudes
that's not
into
the
this text,
point.
who
I'm
is
saying,
interpolating? Who
hello,
is
one second.
interpolating? Who are
Hello,
the
one
people who are doing
second,
the
one
interpolations?
second. Hold
This
it.
also we have to think about.
Srinivas ji, the crux of the matter is simply this. If I say you don't have to listen to Manusmriti, throw it in the garbage, nobody is going to come and beat me up. Nobody is going to come and flagellate me. Nobody is going to threaten to kill me. Whereas in the Abrahamic tradition, that is the case. Number two, let's not forget, you talk of Brahmin supremacy. I wish they were there visible to me as supremacists. At least where I live, the part of India that I know, most are either totally deracinated, they don't know a word of Sanskrit. Many Brahmins are hideously poor, and people, whether in religious, because their yajmani is gone, and they're taking to the most menial occupations. What supremacy? And the elite have taken to English education. They become Macaulay. Shashi Tharoor will talk of Brahmin supremacy. No, he's now a Macaulay Putra supremacist. The point that I would like to, one second, one, every jati had its own priests. They did not have to go by or defer to the Brahmins, so called, which were supposed to be societal leaders. Secondly, much of Hindu faith traditions have been sustained by these roving gurus or sannyasis, kathavachaks. Many of them today have taken even to the social media. The deras, I mean, they kept people bonded together at a time when nothing else was there. The mandirs were being broken and destroyed. Now, when you said equality, and different graded punishments. Did the British ever apply the Indian Penal Code on themselves? No. They looted here, they plundered, they cheated, they did everything wrong. Do you think they ever applied their own law on themselves? If they did, most of them would have been, rotted in prisons all their lives, or been given death penalty. What they did here, they never applied their own laws on themselves. And despite claims of equality, even today, racism is as rampant as it used to be. It just takes other forms. Now they are here in the name of, first they came as rulers to say, we are here to civilize you. Now they want to turn us into feminists, they want to turn us into liberals, they want to turn us into, but it's the civilizing mission going on with deep contempt for us. And I refuse to take their criticism of us and judge ourselves by their standards. Their standards are rotten. And I refuse to try to meet with their requirements. They can go to hell for all I care. Now, Aravinda Rao, you wind up and you answer. I've had my say. Thank you.
I agree with Mr. Srinivas when he says that
Aravinda
these
Garu,
Dharmashastras
I'll just
are.
make one point and then you can have the last word. One point and then I'll not say anything. Then you can answer that and they can close the discussion. So the thing is that I agree with everything that Madhuji is saying, and I agree with everything that you are saying. I'm just saying that there are certain attitudes which have to be recognized, and the source of these attitudes have to be understood, and there has to be explanation for it. That's it, right? The other point is that I'm still looking forward to the day when the Pithadipatis and the Mathadipatis would make a statement saying the source of the Sanatana Dharma, the Vedas, are open for every Hindu. I'm still waiting for that day.
I agree with you on that point. The source of neo-orthodoxy, as you said, the source of neo-orthodoxy is actually foolishness or ignorance, because we do not know. If we read our text, if we read Gita, if we read the commentaries on the Gita, you see how noble the thought process is. And that is the reason why I repeatedly say that Hinduism is the only religion where the concept of equality is there. We have allowed all traditions. We never discriminated against anybody. We allowed all types of worship. When we allowed all types of worship, then how this inequality among humans has come? So,
Yeah.
and I also started with the point that when there is a discrepancy between the Shruti and the Shruti prevails. That is the general law. And
Correct.
wherever the Smriti is not in accordance with the vision of this Shruti, it can be ignored. And that is the reason why the society has been ignorant. I give several instances where Shrutis are not even known and then not even followed. And I also agree with you that the Dharmacharyas, they have to come out. They have to come up with a new Smriti. In fact, if you know, there was a Swamiji in Andhra Pradesh also, Shivananda Murthy. So he got a new Smriti written. It is called Kaundinya Smriti. It is also there for the 20th century. In fact, it was also presented to some Dharmacharyas and all that. Probably nobody takes the initiative. The problem is who has to bell the cat. So if some Swamiji tries to take initiative, he will be ridiculed by other people who are, as you said, somebody who wants to preserve their, say, position. So the problem is rather complicated, but probably a day will come when all these people will come together, and then they will say that Dharma Shastra is not something which is eternal. There are certain things which are eternal. There are certain things which are subject to change. Certainly, this Dharma Shastra also, we need a new Dharma Shastra. There is no doubt about it. But the point you said about 90% of the people who were denied it is not correct. 90%, in fact, Shudras were not
Today.
90%. In fact, 80, it is on the contrary. More than 80% were the Dvijas, Brahmana, Kshatriya, and Vaishya.
No, I
And
said
maybe
today, sir. Today.
might have been the main people. And
90%
these
today,
people,
sir.
they became Shudras only after these invasions and all that, throwing away their Janus and all that, they became Shudras. That also we find in our own texts. So this, and also the Brahmins, now they may be having money, but in olden days they were extremely poor. Except maybe some people who were there in king's courts and all that, all of the people were extremely poor. And you see any book, you find only all these accounts only, anywhere.
Actually, Arthashastra actually gives the salaries also, sir. You can see a carpenter making more money than a teacher.
So Brahmins were tolerated only, even if they felt, spiritually superior. There is what is called a spiritual hierarchy, equality and social equality. In fact, one of our senior officers, one chief secretary, who happens to be a Dalit officer, he was saying, yes, we are not bothered about social equality. We are not bothered about economic equality. They are there. But then we need spiritual equality also, and that is what you said also. Spiritual equality. Who has to tell it? Tell it. The Swamijis have to come together and tell it. I also feel that it is the need. I really feel. In fact, for example, and if the Swamijis they cannot come together, even the government can take initiative. They can de-recognize what is called caste. So the community called Brahmanas or somebody called Archaka has to be there. He may not be called a Brahmana. He should be called Archaka. Otherwise, if a person who performs the religious duty, he is not available, the religion also will collapse. Then happily the other two religions will come. That is exactly what they are waiting for. That is the reason why they cannot find fault with our Upanishads. They can't find fault with our doctrine. They can only find fault with, okay, Krishna married some 60,000 women or something like, say, Dharma Shastra says like this. They can only fault us on certain small things like this. And Puranas and, Dharma Shastras. They cannot find fault with us on the doctrine as such. So that is how I think. And many points you said, you see, the same anguish is there in the minds of several people.
Now, I really congratulate you, sir, and Madhuji, for conducting programs like this, because your points, the point of views have to be given more visibility within the Hindu society, and this is a prime need today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, both of you, for your very passionate discourse. And thank you, Aravinda Rao ji, for giving us real insights into our heritage, intellectual heritage. And I would like to clarify for many of our viewers who think we're still debating with Maitreyi Goswami. No, we're not. This is a very important aspect of um, trying to understand who we are, because we've been attacked on this, we have been brutalized, we've been defamed, we've been demonized, mostly on fake, cooked up charges. I have no problem with people who hold a mirror to us and show us our actual face. But the mirror that they hold to us, whether it's the Abrahamics or the Ambedkarites or the communists, they hold a mirror that I don't recognize my face. I tell them, you've got some other monster in your head sitting there, and you've got a sinister, evil agenda. Your intention is not good. And those on whose behalf the Ambedkarites, the commies attack us, their track record is so gross. Their track, both in terms of their intellectual caliber, integrity, as well as their practice. People who are followers of genocidal cults, both Abrahamic religions, be it Islam or Christianity, wherever they have set foot, they have only carried out genocidal violence. There, cultural genocide, physical genocide, brutalization. And I will certainly never learn any lesson in equality from those who have not only carried on those genocides in the past, but continue to do so today. Even this war, so Russia war and Ukraine war, whose product is it? Whose product is this? What they did in Iraq, what they did in Syria, what they've done, wherever they've set foot, in Vietnam, wherever they have set foot, not just in 19th century when they came as brazen colonialists, they starved us to death, and they destroyed our knowledge traditions. People who've been enemies of our society, of our people, of our knowledge traditions, and have tried to destroy the best that is in us, have no right to criticize us. I refuse to listen to them. However, we are carrying
Very
on
short.
this discussion and debate for youngsters who remain clueless how to answer to malafide, malicious criticism, because our education system has not equipped our youngsters to connect with the past in a creative way. Be critical of whatever doesn't make sense to you. And when I say what is the relevance of Jati, Varna versus caste, I'm by no means suggesting that we're going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to bring it back. And that there's no going back in history. And as has been famously said, you never step into the same water twice. And the continuum, change is the only continuum in life. Now, when that we accept, not today, our ancestors accepted change, and that's why the freedom to change whatever shastric wisdom, whatever wisdom came to us from our rishis, we were free to interpret it and use whatever part of it we found useful, discard what we didn't find useful. And the rishis themselves said, you're supposed to do it. All wisdom, all dharma is time specific, culture specific, situation specific. There's nothing written in stone. When we have that freedom, we don't need to worry about their approval. To me, the agenda is only enabling our young people to get a nourishing intellectual, spiritual, dharmic diet, which we've all been, including me, deprived of for all these decades after so called independence. I call it actually the partition day, 15th August, not Independence Day. We've been deprived of it. even after we supposedly became independent. We remain colonized intellectually, and therefore our young people are not able to look at the world straight in the eye. So, this is nothing to do with Maitri Goswami. I'm not trying to score any points on her. I'm very happy she's finding a following. If only people would actually start reading those texts, not just using it to create a herd. Please read and try to make sense of them. If she can provoke you, she can instigate all of you to read those texts. Like Aravinda Rao ji inspires me to read what all he has studied. Whatever little there is left of my life, I certainly will try to make the best use of this time. And my real education started only post internet, post all these social media platforms. Honestly, I learned very little in my formal education, the years of formal education, even though I went to supposedly elite universities. We are really getting a chance now for the first time to connect with our past and get diverse views available to us. I'm not in a hurry to come to any conclusions because this is a very complex heritage we have. And there are no simple answers, but use common sense. Use common sense. When you find something offensive in X or Y, Z text, please check, is it being followed? Do you know of cases when actually this happened? Did anybody do that? For example, my second name is not a Jati name, not a caste name, so called. Believe you me, I have rarely in India been asked, आप कौन सी caste से हैं? No, nobody asks me. And I don't ever need to explain. Rarely, maybe 3 times or 4 times in my entire life. And I'm quite old. So if I can easily swim through without any Brahmin trying to certify me as high or low, nobody has dared do that or tried even to do that. I don't know why we need to take this whole myth of, I honestly think it's a myth of Brahmin supremacism, simply because they are in a poor shape. Either they don't know the heritage, they've moved away from it. If you're an IS officer or a police officer or a businessman, you're running a bata shoe store, well, there's nothing Brahminical left about you. Therefore, that category I don't count as Brahmins. There are too many poor Brahmins. And I said, I've actually set up a scholarship fund, especially to train priests. I've organized with Gurukuls where they give you high quality traditional education to become informed, well informed priests. I'm not getting candidates. Kindly, anyone who knows kids who want from Brahmin families, and since there are no scholarships for them, there are scholarships for every other category. Brahmins are the only ones who have nothing going for them. And the defamation and demonization hurts me. Thank God I'm not a Brahmin, because then I wouldn't be able to speak with this kind of conviction. Because don't also forget, in the genocidal violence committed by Islamists, in particular, their prime targets for slaughter were Brahmins. उनका जनेऊ उतरवाना है, मनोमन उतरवाना है, उनके स्कल्स के माउंटेन्स बनते थे. इतनी मार खाई है, फिजिकल मार खाई है, स्लॉटर झेले हैं. और अपने मंदिरों को बचाने के लिए ये जो काशी विश्वनाथ का इतिहास जब आप पढ़ते हैं, कितने ब्राह्मण उस मूर्ति को लेके, डियटी को लेके कूद गए, जैसे महिलाएं पार्टीशन के कूदी थी वेल्स में, ताकि उनकी बॉडी, डेड बॉडी भी हाथ में ना आए इस्लामियों के, मूर्ति खंडित ना हो. किस तरह कितनी बड़ी सैक्रिफाइसेस दी उन ब्राह्मण्स ने उन मूर्तियों को खंडित होने से बचाने के लिए. खुद मूर्ति लेके कूद गए पानी में, वेल नदी में, जहां भी. The point that I'm making is this demonization is ill-deserved. And especially if we take into account the definition that Aravind ji has given of who constitutes a Brahmin. And to my mind, that Dharmaraj ka definition is very satisfactory. and I'm sure Srinivas agrees with it too. We are going to continue with this debate not because we have any issues with Maitri Goswami. She's now history, as far as I'm concerned. They can continue with their own little debates, but there's a much larger world outside. And I wish the world that is inhabited by Maitri Goswamiji would interact in a forceful manner with the world that doesn't believe in their worldview. It's very important to test the validity of your views with people who are not your blind followers. So, with these words, I thank both of you for a very lively session.
Thank you
And
very much.
we had to
This
interrupt each other. Arvind
is
Raoji, we're going
fantastic.
to have you again. And also, Srinivasji, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
And
Thank
viewers,
thank
please
you.
do like, share, and support our channel. Zarur feedback dijiye how to improve on these debates. But I'm going to continue with this topic endlessly till we've sorted it out to some extent, till there's some consensus, at least among those of us who think we stand up for our own dharma and civilization. Dhanyavad, Shubh Ratri.
Shubh Ratri.
Thank you.
Shubh.
Good night.